Good morning. And if I can ask everyone to please put their phones on silence, I will try to move us as quickly as I can through the day. Anyone who knows me can attest I've never had an unspoken thought, but you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to an amazing group of people we have compiled today. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our sponsors at the outset: Booz Allen, GDIT, Mastercard, and Palo Alto Networks. This view wouldn't be possible without all of them. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to their subject matter expertise that is part and parcel of today's event. Before we begin, I'd like to take 1 minute and a moment of silence to one of Auburn's own who made the ultimate sacrifice just recently in Iraq, to Alex Klinner, and if we could just bow our heads for 30 seconds. Thank you. And just another reminder that the issues we're talking about are not academic, they're real. And I have the privilege to kick us off this morning with the man at the pinnacle of our cyber policy, the National Cyber Director, Sean Cairncross, who, if you hadn't seen, check out his podcast we did last week. He laid out and unpacked the national strategy, and I think did a phenomenal job, and I'm thrilled is able to join us today. Sean, thank you so much. Thank you for all it is you do every day, and congratulations for getting it over the goal line. So no easy feat.
No. Well, thank you, Frank, and thanks for having me. And McCrary, you guys have been so helpful in this, and your thought leadership on this has been important for a long time. So I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone's time in being here. And look, this is an honor to serve in this role, and it's been a fascinating experience. But we've got a forward-leaning administration with a president who expects and demands results of the team, and so we are happy to be rolling forward.
Yeah, let's start at the beginning. So when we look at the national strategy, and we'll unpack some of the pillars momentarily, but what is uniquely new that you guys proposed and are advancing in the national strategy?
Sure. Look, I think the biggest single thing that we're doing in this front is standing cyber up as its own strategic domain. So this, for a very long time, it's just the way this domain has developed in practice over decades has been very diffuse. It's been subject to different agencies and lines of authority and different direction. And so I think the thinking has increasingly, over the course, particularly of the last decade, really coalesced around the direction that we are moving as an administration and a government on our strategic front. But there hasn't been direction from the very top of the pyramid to say, this is the way we're going to go. And so the president has done that. And that's, I think, the biggest. So for the entire USG, for our private sector partners, for our international allies, this signals a direction and American leadership in this domain, which I think is a positive thing.
So let's unpack pillar one. Most people here probably know I've been a bit of a broken record on this. We've been far too reactive. Pillar one is focused on inducing changes in adversary behavior, putting the onus on the perpetrator, not the victim. And I think we've seen in real world events this play out in practice, whether Absolute Resolve or whether Midnight Hammer or more recent operations in Iran. General Kane's been pretty vocal in terms of cyber as a first mover and how it's being integrated into our warfighting strategy and doctrine. What should we be thinking about there? And I would love to also go a little deeper on what you think the role, I think you call it unleashing the capability of the private sector, what that could look like.
Sure. Well, pillar one is shaping adversary behavior. And like you say, this is a particular frustration of mine, and it's been for some time. The risk calculus on our adversary side in this space doesn't seem to be calibrated correctly. Things like holding our critical infrastructure at risk, that is something that an adversary would not consider doing in any sort of kinetic way, primarily because they know the response from the United States would be rather dramatic. And so that same level of thinking should have to be applied when they are making calculations in this domain, and not doing so, I think, as a government is not doing the job that we're here to do in protecting the country. So oftentimes people hear me say that and they think, well, he's just talking about offensive cyber, unoffensive cyber, and that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. First thing I'd say is the United States, without question, has the most advanced, most talented, most innovative cyber operators in the world. The NSA, the CIA, Cyber Command, the FBI, CISA, the entire USG is phenomenal on the cyber front. I'm talking about a whole of government response. I'm talking about everything from the diplomatic side of it, the economic side, the cyber side, all the way up the chain, in looking strategically at how do we impact decision-making for this domain on the adversarial front. And to your question on the private sector, I think what that means is, first, let's say what I'm not talking about. I am not talking about private sector industry or companies engaged in a cyber offensive campaign. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about are the technical capabilities, the ability of our private sector to eliminate the battlefield from what they're seeing, to inform and share information so that the USG can respond to get ahead of things, respond in defensively in a more agile fashion, to engage in this collaborative operation with the USG so that we can go about shaping, like I say, this risk calculus. That's what I'm talking about. There's an enormous amount of capability on the private sector side, and now we have a steer from the United States government that we are looking for real partnership in this regard.
Sean, thank you for that clarity, because I think that does get lost in a lot of people's thinking in terms of what it means. But it does lend itself to greater and more operational collaboration, correct?
It does. And I think there's important in this is we need to figure out a way, and we are working to do so that our information sharing, both from the USG to the private sector and vice versa, is as actionable and relevant in real time as possible. And there's a lot that goes into that. From the USG side, there are a number of classification issues, et cetera. On the private sector side, there are liability concerns, just broadly speaking, and we are working to engage all of those things so that we can align priorities and get the information flowing that can be most impactful. Form should always follow function, and if the function is protecting people and protecting our infrastructure and the United States, then the form should be as efficient and impactful as it can be.
Well said. And I'm going to skip over pillar 2, which we are doing a lot of work in combination with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on common sense regulation. But let's go to pillar 3, which is focused on federal tech modernization and what the USG itself can be focused on, whether it's defense networks or civilian networks. how do we ensure that we can turn to the best and the brightest and unleash in a true way the capabilities that the private sector can bring to this?
Yeah, there are a couple of things I'd say, but specifically on that point, what we're excited about is working with our interagency colleagues and the private sector to launch pilot programs that will accelerate the deployment of new technology in this regard. So we're working with our colleagues at OMB and GSA to overcome procurement hurdles, and DOW is working on acquisition matters as well. We're going to utilize the federal government's authorities and testing capabilities, including working with the national labs to red team new technology and get it deployed at relevant speed. I think there's so much. We see the scale of this. We were just talking backstage. The scale of these attacks and the sophistication of them are increasing. The deployment of artificial intelligence into this framework is doing nothing but making it faster and more agile on the attack front. And we need to utilize those same technologies and get them deployed again at relevant speed on the defensive side. And this all goes, I mean, this is all interconnected, all these pillars. And this gets back to sort of the first part of this, which is there are just too many points of defense to say we can play defense all day long and that'll take care of it. Resiliency, by definition, says you're going to be taking hits. And I think that we need to get ready on the defensive side, move at speed, but also be very focused on imposing real risk on our adversaries.
You know, and when people talk resilience, they often talk about bouncing back. There is an opportunity to bounce forward too, right? And
That's
and
right.
is that what I'm?
Yeah, no, we're pro bouncing forward.
There we go. Always good, always good. And anything you want to say on PQE, post-quantum?
Yeah, post-quantum is vital. It is quantum and post-quantum are coming. They tend to come. These things tend to develop and leap forward faster than expected, and so it's incumbent on the USG to put us in a position to be ready for a post-quantum future. We're working through policy measures on this in real time with the interagency. We've got great partnerships with OST, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, with Commerce, with Treasury. Everyone is very focused on this.
So a quick word on Pillar 4, critical infrastructure, since that'll take up a lot of the discussion later in the day around our critical infrastructure owner-operators. But anything there you want to foot stomp?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, and so many of you in the audience are part and parcel of this, is the critical infrastructure is defended and maintained by the private sector. And so whether we're talking about the regulatory scheme and working to streamline that, the information sharing that I was talking about earlier, we want to make sure that we're positioned as the USG to work with the private sector, that we're seen as a helpful partner. It's not your job to defend against the Chinese or the Russians or the Iranians. That's the United States government's job. We're asking to work with you to get that done. And so there are a few of these sectors, and then shifting to your question about what are we doing about it, we are going to employ the same sort of pilot program framework on some of the critical infrastructure sectors that get less attention, things like water, for example, or rural hospitals. Things where it is, in the past, I think folks have looked for a 50-state solution here. And I think that intent is correct. We want to get there. I think it's hard to do in practice. So we're going to go to specific states in localities, test drive new technologies, work with our industry partners, our state government partners, really engage the state and local partnerships on this front, and try to drive the capabilities and the technology level up and the costs down. And where we find success, we're going to scale off of that.
Awesome. And I think that's emblematic. So you have a number of sectors like the electricity subsector and the energy sector. You've got the defense industrial base. You've got telecommunications. You've got financial services. Many of them have resources. They have their smaller companies that need support. But when you look at water, when you look at some of these other sectors that are essential to modern society but don't necessarily have the resources.
That's right.
That's where you're doubling down. And SLTT is a strong partner of NCD's.
Yep. Absolutely.
And we'll hear more from Sis on that in a little bit.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean, we've got several of our colleagues here in the front row, and they will tell you this administration is highly communicative with one another. So this is something that we are all engaged in. This is a real whole of government approach, and not in theory, in actual practice.
Awesome. Now I want to jump very quickly to emerging tech, and you can't have a cyber discussion without AI as part of that discussion, and this is in Pillar 5. You made some strong and bold statements, which I personally agree with, but looking at sort of the American tech stack and a clean tech stack, and I guess that gets to that all instruments. Anything you want to foot stomp there as well?
Yeah, well, I would just say
without stifling innovation at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Where I was going to start is President Trump has been very forward leaning on the innovation side of this and on the deployment side. In the artificial intelligence field in particular, if we're going to win this race, we're going to have to get this technology. We're going to have to scale innovation, and we're going to have to deploy it and get use cases and development moving. What we are working for in my lane is to ensure that the technical security is not seen as a barrier to that innovation, but is seen as a fundamental piece of the ability to scale it and move it as quickly as possible. And we've had great partnerships in doing that, and it's a process that we're working through right now, internal in the White House. But it's I think we're going to land in a terrific spot with respect to Sorry, I lost the second part of your question.
Without stifling innovation.
Right, and that's the key is to move this. We've got to scale it and move it.
And acquisition and everything else.
Sorry, the tech stack is what I was saying.
The tech stack.
Yeah. So we were just talking about this backstage as well. We were in Munich talking about this. Seems like a long time ago now, but it wasn't that long ago.
2 weeks, right? 3.
Right. And what we are not only the artificial intelligence piece of this, but the entire tech stack and a secure tech stack is what we are pushing as the USG. And you can think of that as the American tech stack. You can think of that as the American plus allied tech stack. But in practice, as things exist right now, it is primarily an American tech stack. And the alternative to that is a Chinese tech stack that is not secure. And so we are working hard on the diplomatic front, on our colleagues in commerce and trade, to ensure that message is clear. We are trying to engage our partners and potential partners around the globe in infusing that clean U.S. tech stack into the equation. And that's vital for a number of reasons, not the least of which is freedom of thought and the fighting against the export of the surveillance state. But it gets to a number of the sort of information sharing and intelligence relationships across the board.
Really glad you brought that point up, because I think we sometimes assume our innovation, which is the best in the world, but autocracies, underlying all of these threats are countries that may not have democratic principles in mind, right?
Well, not may not, don't have them.
Yeah, thank you.
And not only that, but they're subsidizing their stuff. So they're selling cheaper stuff, which is what you run into a lot is you hear things, digital sovereignty or what have you, that's thrown around. And what that often means is we're looking to buy the cheap stuff, but the cheap stuff comes with a giant back end bill. And when that bill manifests, it's usually, it can be too late to change things. So it's really a full push effort to make that message clear from the USG side of things on the front end.
Sean, really well said. The tyranny of time requires I be a bit of a tyrant here. I'm going to ask one last question. Logistics, unfortunately, there were so many questions I wanted to ask, but what's one thing our USG partners, our industry partners, or the American people should take away from? What should they be thinking about when they head home?
Yeah, I think that it is the United States government is wrapping its full arms around our role in protecting the American people, the American industry and companies in this space. And we are looking for full engagement and partnership. And so what I would ask is anyone in this crowd or in any industry who has questions or thoughts about what's happening, what needs to happen, don't sit in a room and wonder. Pick up a phone and call. We will call you back. We will be responsive.
They really do.
We're looking to move forward. We're looking to move forward at speed. And so I would just ask you to look at the administration and the government here as a willing partner.
Sean, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for advancing the ball on such a complex set of issues, and onward and upward. I think everyone here wants to make sure you succeed. So thank you for all of that.
It's an honor to serve for the president and to work with all my colleagues in this. And thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for listening.
Keep running. Yeah. Thank you, Sean. All right. We'll give 2 minutes to reset the stage and then bring our interagency panel on. So thank you, dude. That was Everyone to please find their seats. Logistics. I got to try to keep us on time. All right, you don't want to hear my loud voice. I'm Italian, so not sure you want that. But if everyone can please find their seats. So want to jump right into what I think is a phenomenal panel from the Interagency. And I'm going to quickly introduce everyone, one sentence. But first we have Alex Fitzsimmons, who is the acting undersecretary at Energy and is also the director of CSER. Two massively important jobs at a critical time. And I mentioned Sean's podcast. Alex's is coming out today, so please tune in to get a much more in-depth perspective on the good work he and DOE is pursuing in this space. Then we've got Brett Leatherman, who's leading the cyber division. He's the assistant director of the cyber division at FBI. Obviously, the FBI has a critical mission in the cyberspace, and Brett has done yeoman's work in advancing all of that at speed. Then we have Brandon Pugh, who is the principal cyber advisor at U.S. Army. I'm not going to pick favorites of services, but Army is kicking some serious ass. Go Army. No, in all sincerity, Brandon's done phenomenal work there, and a lot of what Sean was discussing in terms of acquisition and speed, a lot of that is not academic in any way, shape, or form, and Army is at the heart of it all. And then last but certainly not least, Chris Butera, who is a long-time, long-serving and phenomenal public servant at CISA, who has done yeoman's work in advancing the mission and is now back in the acting director's role of the cyber division at CISA, which, not to pick favorites at CISA, that's the coolest shop at CISA. So what I thought I'd do is to sort of just start us out, go down the line to get a sense of, you just heard from Sean and the national strategy that was just released. Let's get a sense of how each one of your agencies fits into that big picture. Alex, let's start with you.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Frank, and thank you for having me here for this awesome event. Yeah, Sean Cairncross really set the tone from the top. President Trump sets the tone. You see the national cyber strategy outlines a clear direction for the future. It gives all of the agencies, all of us sitting here, clear marching orders for how to implement it. You heard Sean talk about some of the pillars that are in the strategy. We at the Department of Energy are especially happy to see the emphasis on critical infrastructure. I think Sean was mentioning this. We're both in Munich for the cybersecurity conference and the Munich Security Conference, and to see the emphasis on operational technology and critical infrastructure that sometimes gets left out of a lot of these cyber discussions that focus more on IT and the interdependencies, especially between different OT sectors, energy, water, telecom, et cetera. Bringing that focus, especially to under-resourced critical infrastructure sectors. Even within the energy sector, 80% of the energy sector is owned and operated by the private sector, as Sean mentioned. And a lot of those organizations are well-resourced, but a lot of them are not. They might have one person working on OT or IT, not even a dedicated cyber person, but they're expected to defend their networks against nation-state threat actors. So Pillar 4, critical infrastructure, very important. Pillar 5, technology, AI, DOE is leading a lot of that effort with the interagency. President Trump's AI action plan outlines a bold agenda for the United States to win the AI race, which is absolutely critical. Department of Energy, across all the department, is focused on using AI through the Genesis mission to increase the productivity of scientific discovery and technological innovation. AI for security is a big priority in the CSER office. So we have a three-pronged strategy. It's our AI Forts program that's in the president's budget. It's securing the energy system with AI, from AI, the adversaries, and securing the AI itself. Incredibly important. And then Pillar 6, capacity and talent. Caesar has been doing a lot of work to build especially OT cybersecurity capacity, especially for under-resourced organizations. We have a variety of programs, trainings, exercises, fellowship programs that we're building on, that we're expanding. One new one we started last year because state and local cooperation was mentioned. I'm sure it'll be covered elsewhere. One big program that we just launched last year is called Ciphers, first of a kind cybersecurity training that's focused exclusively on state and local territories and folks that work on state and local cybersecurity, especially energy security. We're focused on expanding that because when we talk about hardening, which we'll talk about later, hardening is as much about people and process as it is technology. So it's great to see the cyber strategy, and we are fast at work at DOE trying to implement many of those pillars.
Thank you, Alex. And not to put too fine a point on it, but we cannot be AI dominant if we're not energy dominant as well.
Absolutely.
Right? That's your other hat. So those are two big hats. Brett, how about the Bureau?
Yeah, so the Bureau fits into 4 of the 6 pillars. I'm going to focus, because Alex did a great job on several of those, on 1 and 4. And 1 is shifting that risk calculus. In the FBI, through our law enforcement and our intelligence community authorities, are one of the few agencies who can conduct offensive action in order to remove capacity and capability from the actors, doing technical disruptions. Last week, we announced a technical operation with Europol that removed LeakBase, the top English-speaking forum that sold credentials, exploits online, that remove the capacity of the actors to do it. And when we talk about shifting risk, we've now got their entire database on that forum, and we're going through it right now to follow the actors in pursuit of arrests and extraditions back to the United States. In the last year alone, we've had a significant number of cyber actors extradited to the U.S. The Italians have done an incredible job at arresting folks who like to vacation in Italy, which to me serves to me it serves as a deterrent. If you can no longer vacation in Italy, if you're now resigned as a cyber hacker to Moscow, Tehran, Pyongyang, or similar locations, that should serve as a deterrent to conducting cybercrime. So, in fact, one of the top PRC actors was arrested in Italy and is awaiting extradition. Zhu Zhuwei sits in an Italian prison, and we are trying to get him here. He was responsible in part for the Hafnium hack several years ago, and he is hopefully on his way to the United States soon to face justice here. We also have equal, priorities given to Pillar 4, which is protecting critical infrastructure with DOE, certainly with CISA. When it comes to the FBI's footprint, we have 56 field offices located throughout the United States. That is kind of our magic sauce, in that we build relationships in communities throughout the U.S. to include our cyber teams. Every one of those 56 field offices have at least one dedicated cyber component to engage and share what we know on the threat to defend critical infrastructure. And what we've done here in the last 30 days is to put that in practice publicly. I would encourage everybody to check out Operation Winter Shield, fbi.gov/Winter Shield. And it's our sharing of the top 10 controls critical infrastructure and others can take right now, pursuant to our law enforcement authorities, translating the law enforcement response into what folks can do from an actionable standpoint. Along with CISA, we're trying to advertise that so that folks understand, here's the top 10 areas we continue to see risk from a cyber standpoint, whether you're a small organization sitting in rural America or a Fortune 50 company.
Brett, thank you for that. And I've been a huge proponent of the role of ALATs that the Bureau has overseas. This is playing out in reality, right, in terms of some of the operations with Europol.
Right now.
One other point I want to touch on, and not get into any details, but the Bureau also has a critical foreign counterintelligence mission, right? So it can sort of cross both worlds.
It's interesting because we are the nation's domestic counterintelligence agency, right? And cyber is all over that. And so Roman, who is the assistant director of counterintelligence, and I are latched at the hips when it comes to counter China, counter Iran, counter Russia, counter nation states in general. And then on the terrorism front, the assistant director of counterterrorism division and I are latched at the hip on countering all terrorist activity leveraging technology. And right now, with the ongoing conflict in Iran, that is incredibly important.
Thank you for that. Brandon.
Well, good morning, Frank. Thanks for having me. I have to say, you left one part of my bio out that I'm actually very proud of. Is I was the first person on your podcast in your new studio. So
Well said,
I hate to tell
and
the
it was a
NPD
kick-ass,
director-
and it was a kick-ass interview.
No,
so.
I only say that because it's,
No,
an
it's true.
impressive setup.
No, thank you,
I'm
Brandon.
very jealous of it, but truly glad to be here. I mean, I know many of you in the audience, but maybe it. Not to promote the role I'm in, but most people don't understand what
Do
my
promote
role,
it.
Yeah, people don't actually really understand how I fit in. They're like, well, you're the principal cyber advisor. What does that mean? So interestingly enough, the role, and a couple of you in the audience actually helped make the role, so thank you. In 2019, Congress established a role, and the reason they did, they said there needs to be one person for each military department, in my case, the Army, who is responsible to directly advise your highest civilian leader, our secretary, as well as your highest military leader, our chief of staff. And that's how the role came about. But in doing so, we also have 8 statutory responsibilities. One of them that we lean into pretty heavily is our budget oversight authority. So I review and certify the funds that the Army makes in cyberspace operations, which is a unique authority. We also roll on man, train, equip, defending Army networks, how the Army is playing in offensive operations, and so on. And then unique to our role, we have electronic warfare as well as information operations.
Which was a big win early
100%.
to tie it together.
Exactly. And we can get to that later, but it's important to see how EW, cyber, and IO continue to blend and operationally how you can leverage them together. But it's a unique time, in the department, I would say. Secretary Driscoll, as well as our Chief of Staff, General George, have been laser focused on continuous transformation. And that is not just a marketing document. That is a concerted effort to really transform the Army to that future fight, that future battlefield. And cyber and tech is critical to that. In fact, if you look at what Secretary Hegseth directed the Army to prioritize, 2 of the 5 priorities listed, cyber and EW.
Which is UAS, right? You got it all.
100%. Which is not something we shouldn't take for granted, because you don't always see cyber come to a top 5 list of priorities. But I will say, to go full circle, that's why it's really great timing for this cyber strategy, because a number of the efforts we have been working on to date, you named a couple, acquisition reform, something that's really key to us, protecting our defense critical infrastructure, all of our installations, we've been doing. Seeing that now come out from the White House with a very clear directive to prioritize, work together. These shouldn't be siloed efforts. I will say one that Director Cairncross referenced, we shouldn't see cyber as just a siloed capability. This really should be infused across our response as a United States government. And I'd say that's not just offensive operations, which the director was key to point out to, but for us, the messaging there was very strong. You've seen so many administrations just shy away from ever alluding to offensive operations. But they were very clear in the strategy, the president, of how offensive cyber has a key role to play, and going as far to reference 2 recent operations where it had a role. And I think it's putting adversaries on notice that the United States government is not going to be shy to respond with all types of means, whether that be cyber or, as the strategy points out, perhaps responding with other types of means that are not just limited to cyber. That messaging, shouldn't go unnoticed.
Brandon, and not to put too fine a point on it, but cyber is its own domain, but it transcends all domains, right?
100.
And space, you could say the same.
You're right. I think, the temptation has been too long just to see cyber as something that rests at Fort Meade or Fort Gordon in the Army's case. That's true. There is going to be cyber, just, siloed cyber operations. The other question is, though, how can cyber go and support other types of military operations? How can it be an enabler as well? And then the third point, how is it blending across all of our different efforts in the military, like EW or in information operations?
And I'll want to pull the thread on that, as well as protecting defense critical infrastructure, because they are dependent upon commercial sectors to deploy forces, project power, and the like. So that's where that one team, one fight Army motto comes together, right?
Exactly. And we need our partners here. I mean, this is something, not to single them out, but it's something that energy has a very clear nexus to with us, given the reliance on private utility operators, something the FBI can do to help protect our installations. This is a whole government response that we see kind of unfolding now.
For us, CISA, the nation's cyber defense agency, has a number of critical infrastructures that it serves as the sector risk management agency. Tell us about how you fit into the national strategy.
Yeah, thanks, Frank.
everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, we really
All the
do
time.
help with executing all 6 pillars. But most importantly, we are a partnership agency first, and so we are working with all the people here on stage, with all of the companies and critical infrastructure organizations in this room. And thank you for convening this really important panel. I'll probably just try to do a quick speed run through the 6 pillars rather than take up all the time here today on each of them. In the first one, in shaping adversary behavior, we're really looking to increase the cost of doing business to the adversary. And we're trying to figure out ways to do that at scale. Just to plug the podcast again, you and I talked a little bit about the CVE
And another
program,
my
right?
goodness.
Like
Brett, we got to get you on. We love the Bureau. They're next.
So we talked about the CVE program and kind of how we can better prioritize vulnerability management across critical infrastructure, right? So we had 48,000 CVEs that we added to the database last year. That's a lot of different vulnerabilities. And so we're continuously working through the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, the KEV, and other ways to help prioritize organizations to do the patching they need to and to do that at speed. So we're continuing to do refinements around that program. But we have to add more ways to do automation in this space and continuously moving as fast as the adversary is going. So I think one of the other things we're continuously to do is how we address this at scale is really developing more secure software. And so we think there's a lot of opportunities here and potential challenges with AI being used for software development. So trying to do more and ensuring that we have more secure software and less of that vulnerability space for the adversary to be playing in every day. On the second pillar,
Chris, can I just ask a follow-up quickly?
Yeah.
So secure by design or cyber-informed engineering, which DOE, that's alive and doing well?
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So we really believe that this is the only way we are going to win this cyber war is by getting better at software at the front end, at understanding how software is written, and trying to eliminate entire classes of vulnerabilities. So we continue to work with all the companies who have signed the Secure by Design pledge. We continue to convene technical exchange groups with those companies for them to actually convene and share different best practices on how they're achieving Secure by Design within their companies.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for
Pillar
asking.
2.
Yeah. So pillar 2,
CIRCEA?
common sense regulations. You said it, CIRCEA. So I think, we have a really important regulation here that we are trying to roll out. And we really believe this will be important in providing the government the right situational awareness of critical cyber incidents, but as well as, how we can actually quickly take what is being shared with the government and push that back out to prevent similar incidents from occurring. So we're really committed to making sure the final rule is as least burdensome as possible and making sure that we're getting the right amount of information to the government. Pillars 3 and 4. So my boss will be here later, so I don't want to steal all his talking points. So I'll go really light on them. But I'm really happy to see on pillar 3 the word modernization being used. So we work across the federal government all day long trying to help the federal governments secure their networks, and we continue to see opportunities for modernization that are just missed. And we have end of support hardware and software systems that are indefensible and just really easy for the adversary to gain that initial foothold. So really excited to see modernization there. And securing critical infrastructure. I mean, I don't know if I need to dive into all the different things we do there, but really happy to hear.
We don't have time for all of that.
Really happy to hear Alex talk about OT, and I think we're really excited for that to be a focus of that as well. On pillar 5, the emerging tech side, we continue to work both to harness AI for cybersecurity purposes. We think that is a big advantage. And then also making sure that we're securing AI and rolling that out in the way that is not going to, I think as Director Cairncross talked about, enhance other adversaries' training data sets and making sure that we're not introducing additional vulnerabilities into our networks. The last one, the cybersecurity workforce talent and capacity. I really liked how the National Cybersecurity Strategy talked about the workforce as a strategic asset. Our people at CISA, for example, are the key to our success there. We have a really talented workforce, and I think it's really important for us to continue to upskill and train the workforce as we see the landscape is transforming at such a hyper rate. And so we do a lot of work in that space. We do a ton of training across the federal governments. We do a lot of OT training for critical infrastructure owners and operators. And we think it's really important to keep up the pace of upskilling and reskilling for our cyber workforce.
Thanks to CISA right now, because they are operating without pay in the cybersecurity their workforce is doing this. We have done this before recently in the longest shutdown ever, and I know the impact it had on morale for the FBI and the interagency. They're doing it a second time. So thank you to your teams
Appreciate
for
it, Brett.
continuing to push through.
Thank you for that, Brett. And so true. And when we talk about workforce, and I want to get all of your ideas maybe to close at the end of this panel, but at the end of the day, technology changes, human nature remains consistent, good, bad, but it's ultimately the good people that are going to win this challenge, and that gets lost sometimes in all of our discussions here. Alex, I want to go back to you and you had discussed some of CSER's role, but I'd like to unpack that a little further. And in particular, I think you were right to recognize not every company is a Southern company or a NextEra or a big utility. You've got munis and co-ops that are just as essential to the American citizens to have their power up and running. How do we see, if you can maybe touch a little more on CSER's particular role, and maybe unpack it if you like. We've witnessed some massive storms of late, and I think CSER fit right into that equation. So if you want to share the emergency response pieces.
Sure, yeah, happy to, Frank. So yeah, the DOE is the Sector Risk Management Agency for the energy sector, and CSER is the lead office within DOE that's focused on that. And CSER is a truly unique office within the federal government. It is the only office that is exclusively dedicated to strengthening the security and resilience of the entire energy sector. So it's an office that was created under the first Trump administration, a recognition that we need to elevate the role of critical infrastructure, security, and resilience. A lot of other offices at DOE focus on individual technology verticals, Office of Electricity or nuclear energy or hydrocarbons. CSER is the only one that focuses on security and resilience of the entire system and all of the interconnectedness within the system and between different systems. And so it's the timing works out well that the National Cyber Strategy was just published, because CSER is preparing to issue our first strategic plan. So CSER has been around for 6 years, first Trump administration, has never had a strategic plan clearly written down explaining what the mission is, what the goals, objectives, key performance indicators are that we're all striving to achieve. Definitely helps that we have a new national cyber strategy. So CSER's mission, as I said, strengthening security and resilience of the energy sector. We do that in a few different ways, a few strategic goals. Our fundamental responsibility is to provide timely and actionable information to the energy sector. We have clearances, most of the private sector does not, but the private sector are largely responsible for defending their networks. We have to do that in partnership. We have to be able to get timely and actionable information out to them so that they can secure their networks. That information is used to inform the development of world-class cyber and physical security technologies, like we were just talking about with AI. AI-enabled offensive cyber weapons, we have to be able to invest in AI for cyber defense. That information and those technologies are then used to secure and harden critical energy infrastructure, especially defense critical energy infrastructure that might be involved in future conflicts. All of that hardening and that information technology helps us prepare and respond to cyber and physical incidents, the lessons learned from which help us provide timely and actionable information to the energy sector. That is the CSER strategic plan in a nutshell. That is the continuous circle of activities that guide what we do every day. I think you mentioned winter storms. large swaths of the country just saw just a month or two ago, major winter storm Fern, impacted more than 200 million Americans across 22 states. In partnership, because we are the SRMA, in partnership with the ESCC, which is the Subsector Coordinating Council for the Electric Power Sector, the Oil Natural Gas Subsector Coordinating Council, we helped the industry mobilize 65,000 personnel who were pre-positioned to respond to that storm and mitigate power outages and save lives. So at the peak of the storm, about 1 million people lost power. That was due in large part to power outages at the local distribution level. So think of power lines that run to people's homes. The bulk power system held up. That's the backbone transmission and generation system that is critical to modern life, critical to our economic growth. That system held up in large part because of that interagency coordination, because of our coordination with the industry, and because of Secretary Wright's unique authorities under Section 202C of the Federal Power Act. We issued 20 emergency orders to help grid operators balance supply and demand and keep the lights on, mitigate power outages during the winter peaks. Something else unique that we did during this time as well, for the first time, we empowered grid operators with tools to leverage backup power at data centers and other major industrial sites. This was a months-long effort from the staff in the CSER team and the Office of Electricity and other program offices within DOE to identify more than 35 gigawatts of backup power, mostly diesel generators, that exist at mostly data centers, but other major industrial sites that sit idle the vast majority of the time, but can and should be leveraged in advance of load shed as a last resort to mitigate power outages. We were able to issue several orders during the winter storm to grid operators who requested these orders. And fortunately, they did not have to use those orders this time, but now they are equipped with a tool that they have going forward to mitigate power outages for future winter storms. And I will say, after Winter Storm Fern went through, there was a cold snap that went through large parts of the Southeast, Georgia and Florida in particular. And Florida leveraged our emergency orders at Publix grocery stores. They leveraged the backup power at hundreds of Publix grocery stores. And that backup power, at a critical time in the morning peak before the solar ramps up, made the difference between large parts of Florida being able to keep the lights on or not. So we're very proud of that effort. That was a huge, tremendous effort by the CSER staff that is helping to stabilize the bulk power system. It's a fundamental responsibility because, as President Trump and Secretary Wright know, energy is not just a critical sector of the economy. It is the critical sector of the economy that makes every other sector possible. So that's why we're really proud to be working in this space and helping the industry.
That was some awesome color commentary too, in terms of real world, because I think this sometimes gets lost in my community. It's not just being ready when the bomb goes off or the balloon goes up or whatever terminology. It takes a lot of, got to put the reps in, and it takes months, and this is hard work, but it's really important work for when that crisis occurs, that you're ready to be innovative, right? So you can't just push a button and snap a finger and expect it to work seamlessly. It's like you can't compete in any sporting event and expect to be ready to compete the day before, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think that's important. Brandon, I want to sort of build on that very quickly from the defense critical infrastructure perspective. And even if you look at it from CONUS inside the U.S., outside the gate, outside a base, you're still dependent upon all of the critical infrastructure, civilian critical infrastructure owner-operators. Yet it is essential. We used to call it mission assurance. I don't know what you're calling it now, but it's essential to be able to move, whether it's personnel, materiel, whether it's to be able to project power deploy forces. Tell me about what you're doing there. And what Army in particular is.
No, Frank,
thinking
you're
about.
spot on. And that's something I think the new strategy from the White House does well. Obviously, it talks about critical infrastructure overall, but it specifically flags defense critical infrastructure, which I think is good because so many times we kind of forget that.
Yep.
But I think to your point,
And we think it's big DOW.
exactly,
they
like
got
the
it
DOW
covered, yeah.
will solve it, but in reality, it is a team sport. Team sport being with the interagency as well as with industry. Because put yourself in our position. We have, and the numbers sometimes vary, but for the sake of argument, let's say we have 288 camps, posts, and station. That's a lot. And, you know, obviously it's important to defend the homeland. That's a critical of importance to the president as well as the Sec War. But to your point on power projection, if there is a disruption to the critical infrastructure to supplying some of our bases, can we move people and equipment in a time of conflict? This is something we've known for years. The Army Cyber Institute at West Point has done great research. Basically, they partner with 2 major U.S. cities per year and show a disruption to one of the bases that they're studying, you know, might interfere being able to move tanks, let's say, and getting ammunition out of port. That's a no-fail mission, something we need to project power. So how are we protecting it? I think we do a really strong job of protecting on our installations. We're limited, obviously, what can be done outside that outside the wire, and that's where it's really a collaborative effort, I would say, with their interagency as well as industry. You know, we can't solve this alone. We need our private critical infrastructure operators to recognize, and I think they do, but to share our view on the threat facing our installation and seeing how we can collectively work to harden these installations. Obviously, there's a burden on us too to see how we can have redundant, you know, power source. And I don't want to pretend to be the energy guy, but there's
It is the most critical, though, right?
And I think
Thank you, Frank.
It is.
like, we
But they
coordinated
depend on
this, Alex.
and
course.
telco and everything else.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, though, it's also being realistic in scope. Obviously, I'd like to go out and solve all 288 installations and make sure they're 100% secure, if that's even ever possible. But the reality is, are there some that are even more critical than others? And how do we narrow that list down and prioritize them? I'd say that's something we've seen going fairly well in the Army, is narrowing it down and realizing that we don't have to protect the installation as a whole. Maybe there's critical missions that happen in the base, but there's other areas of base that may not be part of that power projection necessity. I think having that nuance is key. And to go to Alex's point on OT, I think the Army has been doing a phenomenal job when it comes to our operational technology. Can we improve? Of course. But I think it's realizing that IT and OT are not synonymous, and there's a nuanced approach to addressing both of them that I think we've rightfully identified.
Well,
And just a point about critical energy infrastructure for the military and civilian missions. I think what you're saying is spot on. This is the first time, I think, that DOW and DOE are working so well together in a coordinated fashion to address the security of critical energy infrastructure, both outside the fence and inside the fence simultaneously. So we've been launching a new project called Project Armor in partnership with DOW, where we're doing just that, and we're not operating in silos anymore. We're working on this together because, as you know, vast majority of these installations are not islanded microgrids. They're connected to the broader energy system that's mostly owned and operated by the private sector. And so we have to be doing more together, and we finally are.
And I'm with you. And it puts the burden on offices like Alex and mine to be a resource and be value add. If you're the garrison commander, you have so many things on your plate, and the chances of you being that cyber expert is slim to none. So your mind is likely going to go to physical threats. How do we secure our perimeter? That's all so important. We have to help them identify what are their threats in the cyber domain and how do we fix them.
And I just think the broader reality that IT and OT are converging so quickly, and from an adversarial's perspective, they're going to go where the greatest impact is and the lowest hanging fruit is to cause harm.
Exactly.
So much more to unpack there, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do all of that today. Brett, I want to turn to you because in addition to the national strategy, you had companion executive orders that were promulgated, and one in particular on cybercrime. And would be very curious to get your thoughts as to the Bureau's role in all that, and how you are working with state and local law enforcement.
Yeah, the EO on cybercrime. So the FBI is meeting with the White House and our interagency partners to understand, the intent around that. I think we know the intent around that, but how to execute on that intent. and then align that effort around the pillars of the cyber strategy. The FBI runs the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, the NCIJTF. That is the nation's investigative joint task force.
Which you ran, if I'm not mistaken.
I did,
right?
yeah,
So
but now it's under me. One of my deputy
amazing-
assistant directors run it. It's over 35 agencies sitting in Chantilly, working together to share information about cybercrime, nation-state actors, resilience. CISA sits there, DOE is there, all sharing cyber threat intelligence in order to execute on pillar 1, pillar 4, kind of across the board. And so we're really looking to align the NCI JTF strategy around the EO and how we combat both cyber crime, cyber-enabled fraud, perpetrated by both criminal actors and nation-state actors.
Awesome. And one word which is unfair to lay the threat picture out that we're looking at, because the Bureau cuts across all of that. Anything you would like to share there?
Increasingly complex and sophisticated, and the scope and scale is daunting. I mean, listen, when we're talking artificial intelligence, it's been theoretical for a little while now. We've always been looking to see how the adversaries are going to leverage it. And if you would have asked me 1 year ago, is it advantage defender versus advantage offender? My answer probably would have been different then than it is today, which demonstrates the scope, scale, and speed that the advantage offender is having today is a result of what we've seen in the dramatic increases across agentic AI. And that goes back to the Anthropic report from November. It goes to December in what AWS released about a fairly basic Russian-based hacker being, over the course of 5 months, being able to impact, I think it was 500 organizations because of their use of AI across the platform. The scale and speed is going to necessitate that scale and speed on the defense side. We were talking, I think, earlier about CISA's recommendation about 2 weeks to patch vulnerabilities. Chris and I were both saying we're past that. Like at this point, it's machine versus human defender, and we've got to start to quickly get out of that space. I recognize that organizations are not going to be able to broadly adopt artificial intelligence across their entire ecosystem. Like that is a significant task, but what they can do is start to implement artificial intelligence around their most important assets. That's their certain edge devices that protect critical infrastructure, intellectual property. It's their most important users that would have a significant blast radius if their credentials are weaponized. So it's taking meaningful steps to start to move the needle on the resilience side.
Thank you. And disagree with, but it comes in various shapes, sizes, flavors, and forms. The difference is what used to be in the hands of a handful of nations is now becoming increasingly more available to criminal enterprises and the like, right? So that does change the ball game. So, Chris, sort of looking at so CISA is the SRMA for a number of critical infrastructure sectors, and when we talk about resilience, what do we mean from translating the ideas into capabilities, the nouns into verbs? How do we become more resilient?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. And I won't choose my favorite critical infrastructure sector since we're the national coordinator for all critical infrastructure sectors.
You gotta be. It's like being a father. I have four favorite daughters.
I have a favorite child there to talk about. So I think the important thing that I want to talk about today is the emphasis on resilience. So we put a lot of resources into the prevention part of the incident response lifecycle, but not a lot of people are actually focused on how do we maintain those business operations when we lose access to our critical billing systems, or maybe a cloud asset that we have, or maybe even just the internet in general. So I think one of the things that CISA is really kind of focused, and this is kind of a little bit of a change for us, is working with, I think, a prioritized set of critical infrastructure on how they can continue to deliver mission critical operations during and quickly after a cyber attack. And again, that I think we've seen, quite a few outages in the different cloud assets over the last few months. We've seen a lot of different businesses kind of crawl.
And data centers
stopped.
targeted
Data centers
kinetically,
targeted, right? And a lot of, businesses have been really just come to a complete stop when these outages have happened. And so I think it's really important for our critical infrastructure to figure out what are the key elements of services we're delivering. I think in the DCI, what are those key things that are helping with transportation of logistics and troops and other things, right? How do they continue to deliver just those mission critical services when there is actually some kind of outage or unable to access the internet or with an adversary in the network? So I think that's one of the big things that we're really focused on right now. Is kind of making that shift. We've seen the adversary pre-positioning all across our critical infrastructure. We know that they're gaining access. So how can we actually continue our critical services operations during those times?
Chris, should we assume most of our critical, they're pre-positioned, or what are our thoughts there? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen, especially the PRC repositioning in the Volt Typhoon attacks in many different of our critical infrastructure sectors. We continue to see, I think Brett talked about edge devices being continuously targeted. We've worked a ton of different emergency directives and such in the federal government to try to continue to mitigate these vulnerabilities that we continue to see in these devices. So I think there's a good chance that the adversary has some footholds in our critical infrastructure, and we need to be prepared to continue to operate with
at a
that.
time of their choosing. Exactly. We're down to the last 5 minutes. I want to go through everyone. We'll start with you, Chris. I do want to end with workforce, because ultimately it is the women and men that make a difference, and also ask any questions I didn't ask. I had like 20 more questions we weren't able to get through, but something on workforce, and then also something on any other points you'd like to raise that we didn't get to. We'll start with you, Chris, and we'll end. Alec, you'll have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we are really lucky in the federal government to be recipients of things like the CyberCorps Scholarship for Service program, the Centers of Academic Excellence that provide us a really great pipeline of cybersecurity experts, IT experts that can come into the federal government and really deliver and help us with our mission immediately. I think there's still a lot of work to do to drive cybersecurity education into different domains. We've talked before about computer science degrees lacking, basic cybersecurity kind of fundamentals, and really focus on delivering of code and making sure that code can run and not crash, but not necessarily writing secure code. So I think there's a lot of domains like that. As we think about more and more technology getting integrated to the internet and operational technology and things like that, I think we have similar concerns to make sure that we're teaching people who are building these systems to build them in a more secure way. Again, this is the only way we're going to be able to scale to meet the cyber threat defenders.
Awesome, Chris. Brandon.
I'll flip the two. I mean, I didn't.
And anything I didn't ask that I should have.
No, I can't believe I went through a whole panel without mentioning AI.
I know. I had 2 questions for you around AI.
And on a sincere note, we're very passionate about how do we leverage AI specifically for cyber. We do an awesome job of leveraging AI for enterprise use cases, but how are we leveraging it to be more effective on cyber defense? Equally as important, more effective in cyber offense, and even connecting to our OT mission sets. That is something the Army's been very leaning heavily into. Matter of fact, we have an AI tabletop exercise coming up where we're looking to have industry come and partake around a real world scenario. Well, hypothetical, we'll say, but to see like what can we do to better utilize AI. We realize we don't have all the solutions. We need to look to industry, not just industry that can potentially be a vendor for us, but also just other large companies who have addressed and wrestled with similar complex challenges. But the reason I want to end on people is something the Secretary as well as General George always say is that the people are the core of our Army. Really proud to see a few soldiers that came with me today. We can have exquisite capabilities, but it really comes back to our soldiers. I think truly we have the best operators in the world. We sincerely do. And it's also important to keep in mind our civilian talent as well. We have a number of civilians that are working side by side with our cyber soldiers on a daily basis. The challenge for us is always how do we make sure we're recruiting them, we're retaining them, and making sure they continue to be the most lethal in the cyber domain. And that's something that we are always trying to get better at on a daily basis. We want them to realize that, if you come to the Army, you're going to be on mission shortly after you finish training against, potential threats that the average American will not know. So you have a sincere and a strong impact that you'll have by serving in the Army, whether in uniform or not.
And then really well said. Brett?
Yeah, from a workforce standpoint, we continue to invest in our teams. We have offensive, hackers, we have defenders, we have agents, we have analysts, intelligence analysts, computer scientists. We have to invest in that workforce to defend the homeland. But we're also investing in your workforce, meaning we've now launched Leadership in Cyber, LIN-CY we call it, which is a 1 year at a time cohort that involves U.S. intelligence community, Five Eye partners, and industry leadership who travel the world and meet in different countries to become kind of that future cyber leader. It's not just the technical talent. It's finding out who we need to put in place behind each of us to move into our roles down the road and to lead with conviction, innovation, and to really push the mission forward. So we're looking at that next generation leader. As far as one thing that we haven't talked about today that I would flag is Sean talked about kind of the all of government approach. What I would say is we also are pursuing that all of society approach. Every one of the joint sequenced operations that the FBI conducts to remove that capacity and capability that I talked about from the Russians, from the Chinese, from the Iranians and others happens because a victim came forward and engaged the FBI. Meaning, if a victim comes and says, I have a problem, and they invite our teams in, we come in, we bring unique intelligence to bear that is not otherwise available to help with the hunt efforts, but it also allows us to pivot upstream using our authorities against the bad actors. If you contact us on day one, we're a lot more effective than if you contact us on 2 weeks in. And we have had, UMMC, the major ransomware breach down in Mississippi, was an example of an organization that brought us in quickly and allowed us to bring that intelligence to bear and really help patients, doctors' offices get back up and running. We've had recent examples where organizations have not come to us, or we have talked about what it means to bring the FBI in, and 2 weeks later, we lose the opportunity to impose cost on the actors as a result of that. So one takeaway I think for everybody here is, what is your game plan in the event of a breach to engage your local FBI field office? I would proffer there's very little liability in doing so, and we're happy to have conversations with your outside or inside counsel, but there's a tremendous amount to be gained by doing it.
Brett, I just want to foot stomp. Phenomenal answer. You've also had some significant successes in recouping ransomware, and
providing
that would not be
over $800 million returned to or avoided in ransom payments because victims came to us and we had decryption capability for those variants.
And that has to be early, not late. Alex, you've got the final word.
Love that. So on critical infrastructure, it's a workforce, critical infrastructure. As I mentioned at the beginning, hardening critical infrastructure is as much about people and process as it is technology. And so we have to get more people in the energy sector interested in OT. We have to get more cyber people interested in energy. We have to get more energy people interested in cyber. So we have two categories: training. We have fellowship programs for OT security. We work in partnership with some of our national labs to provide specific OT ICS training to the sector, to folks who are interested in this. And then on the other side, exercises, making sure that we have the right processes and operational planning in place within the energy sector and across other critical infrastructure sectors. And then I'd say, final point, I can't believe I got through a panel without mentioning energy dominance.
There we go.
So I will
there
now.
We go, please.
So, we are in such a unique moment in the energy sector. The energy landscape has changed dramatically. Day one, President Trump declared a national energy emergency. And one important part, there's a lot that we can't talk about here in this panel, but one important part is we cannot sacrifice security for speed. And so this is what President Trump and Secretary Wright acknowledge, believe. And so when Secretary Wright says, Our goal is to build an affordable, reliable, and secure energy system for the American people. He chooses each of those three words precisely. And you cannot have an affordable and reliable energy system if you don't also have a secure one. And so that's what Caesar is focused on, and that's why it is a top priority for the Trump administration.
So much more to unpack. Thank you for spending so much time with us today. And most importantly, thank you for what you do every day and the women and men you lead. So thank you. Please join me in thanking this guest. Again, I'm not going to use my father of 4 daughters or Italian voice, but please find your seats. Hello? I wish I could whistle. I can't. Please find your seats. We're going to kick this off. Have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. All right. Craig, you're going to have to play bodyguard here. So wrestle everyone in. We'll give it 2 more seconds. So. That's the church voice. Quiet. So, if I can ask everyone to please find their seats, we have a lot more to cover and not a whole lot of time to do it. And I'm really excited about our fireside chat here with Horacio, who is the CEO of Booz Allen. Has done phenomenal work with the company. From what I learned today is just, I think, an amazing story. He started at Booz as an intern and made his way all the way up to CEO, and has done yeoman's work in terms of transforming what was always a great company, but into one that is much more focused on technology and in service of its clients in government and industry, and is going to talk about a report that was literally released yesterday on AI. We had a number of themes that I think you can easily pull the thread on from Sean and then the Interagency Panel in terms of speed, and speed. Horacio, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your hard work. I thought to begin with, you've heard talk about acquisition, talk about speed, talk about getting our own houses in order inside government. What do you want to share in terms of the report, and then specifically from the national strategy, how do we translate those concepts into lasting capabilities?
So first of all, thank you for having me, but also for hosting this entire conversation. I learned a lot this morning already, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of insights as we go through the afternoon and the remaining panels. I would offer the following, and I think these are themes that came out before. I think the national cyber strategy clarifies posture and calls for action. From Booz Allen's perspective, I think people know us for a lot of the work that we do for the U.S. government, and we're extraordinarily proud of that work, not just on cyber operations, but on the defensive side. We run the largest program bringing zero trust capability and technology to the DoW. Extraordinarily successful program. We play a significant role in both helping defend the .gov domain and also working with some of the agencies on their own priorities. But also we work significantly on the private sector side of this problem. So last year alone, we responded to over 1,000 cyber incident responses. We work across all 16 critical infrastructure sectors. And importantly, we're not just doing network security, we're working on the OT environments themselves, from helping car companies to pharmaceutical companies to oil and gas exploration upstream, working downstream. So we have a good view. And the way we look at it is we say this is one battle space. Mm-hmm. If you segment this too much, you create seams that an adversary will use to take advantage of your posture. And so as I look at the national cyber strategy, while each one of these pillars has to stand on its own because there's unique issues, you really also have to look at them across. I actually think pillar one may be the most important one in the sense that there's a through line from the posture change on cyber from the first Trump administration to now, in terms of looking for ways to increase cost on the adversary. We'll come back to it, but as agentic cyber takes form, the implications of that, not just on cyber, but across all the other warfighting domains, is something we need to think about, and that first pillar speaks to it. But then when you look at 3, 4, and 5, they are sides of a three-sided coin, if you will, because it's, if you think about critical infrastructure, it's not just the government, it's the government working with the private sector. It's new technology coming in and thinking through how all of that is going to change the playing field. One of the things, I know we'll get into the AI discussion in a second. There's a number of companies in Silicon Valley right now building technology, and because it's subsidized and it's cheaper, they may be using DeepSeek as their underlying model to build an agentic system. Then you go buy that agentic system that you think is from a US company, and what you have underneath that is a Chinese stack you may not even know about. You bring that into your infrastructure, or they're using a code assistant that is built by an adversary that is creating specific vulnerabilities in the code that they're writing. All of these things need to be looked at together, and this is what we do. This is what I think we bring to this fight.
Horacio, I'm reminded of the old Intel commercial, Intel Inside. So that is the challenge, whether it's DeepSeek, Huawei, you name that is essential, right, from a supply chain perspective.
Absolutely. There's a whole AI supply chain. We've had a lot of discussion about the software supply chain. There's a whole AI supply chain that we really need to think about. I've been talking to CISOs, and I say, do you actually know what are all the models that are resident in your environment? They don't. And that is a huge risk that we're all onboarding and we need to work with. We do a lot with the venture community. And as we start working with new partners across the venture spectrum, this is one of the things we talk to them about, and we try to both understand and help them with, which is how do you make sure that what you're building is actually secure and is going to improve the security posture of your ultimate customer, as opposed to create an unknown vulnerability.
Well said. And a lot of the discussion around CFIUS and security tends to be with mature companies, but you're right. It's actually going to be at the very front end of some of the most innovative who are struggling to make ends meet to begin with.
Absolutely
so that's
right.
Hard...
And as we all know, because every company goes through this, if you look at cyber purely as a cost, you're trying to minimize it. If you look at cyber as a source of advantage,
boom,
then that's a different lens. But most companies don't yet have that posture really across from the smallest to the largest.
That is a great reframe, just for what it's worth. Your marketing team should pick up on that, because
Okay. We'll write it down.
That's exactly what it is. I do want to make sure we get to the report that you just released, and I think you mentioned the AI supply chain. You're also looking at an agentic AI kill chain, are you not?
Absolutely.
And what should our audience know about your findings here?
So let me talk about this at 3 levels, from sort of the maybe the most obvious to the most scary. We talked about the AI supply chain and making sure you know what's in your environment. That's relatively obvious, hard to do, but relatively obvious. The second one is that AI itself is an attack surface. There's a whole field of adversarial AI that is hugely important. If you can get a hold, if a bad actor can get a hold of either the weights or the training data, they can make your model do things you don't expect it to do. We've seen this in action already with some of the code assistants, and we need to be super careful about understanding that and protecting that. In fact, we work with some of the frontier labs and some of the people building the large language models to make sure that we understand the potential vulnerabilities and how to close them before those models are released. And then when you want to get to the super scary side, and our colleagues from the FBI were talking about this before, we have built, for the purposes of this conversation, think about it as an agentic red teaming. You can also think about it as an agentic kill chain in our lab for the purposes of training the agentic responders. We were doing a review of the technology the other day, and we had in the room our cyber experts that do the actual red teaming, and we had the tool. In the range, we're going after call it a standard commercial network configuration. we asked our red teamers, how long would it take you to crack into this network from scratch? You don't know anything about it other than maybe an IP address. They said, well, in the best case scenario, 12 hours. While we were having that conversation, the agentic tool cracked it inside of 10 minutes.
Wow.
If you think about it, again, the CISA standard that only 40% of US companies meet is 2 weeks to close a known vulnerability. I don't know how many 10-minute scenarios are in 2 weeks, but it's a lot of them. In my mind, we are moving quickly to and by the way, if this is in our lab, you can bet that the adversaries
have similar labs.
Have similar
Not
labs.
as good, but similar.
They have similar labs. They're building things like that, and that to me is where we are, right? I mean, imagine in your neighborhood if every house had no front door and anybody can get in. I think that's essentially the 2026 is going to feel like that to the cyber defenders. And the agentic response tools are a step behind for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is there's a lot fewer guardrails to the attacker, right? I put something in the environment, it doesn't work. Well, I live to try again, especially because we can't impose costs in the way that we want to. If you're a defender, I put something in my network and it doesn't work, potentially brings my own network down.
Yeah.
So I have to be a lot more careful in onboarding these tools in there. And so we have this gap now between agentic cyber being here on the attack side and agentic defense trying to catch up. We're working that issue. We have a half a dozen tools that are hopefully going to come out this year that are going to be available for our customers. But, and a lot of other people are working on that too. But I think that we have this gap right now that we need to address.
And I fully agree that the initiative remains with the attacker. I am also optimistic. They say a pessimist is an optimist with experience, but I'm still optimistic on this one, that blue can catch up or defense can catch up. And I'm reminded, I see Chris Inglis here with us today, and we had multiple discussions through Solarium on defend forward and what maybe the best way is to be in the space, and you're basically grappling and training, and you've got to be where red is to get to the point where blue should be. Is that fair?
This is why we're building what we're building, is because we want to have in the range not just the defense tools, but the offensive tools, so that they actually are the defensive tools are learning real time
based on what they're seeing.
What they're seeing and how it works. And the Army talks about transformation in contact, right? Meaning, let's not think about these things in the lab. Let's deploy them into the environment so they continuously learn as quickly as possible. I think we need to take that point of view. And by the way, while all of that is coming along, there's a number of well-known technologies like zero trust that can actually, it's one thing if somebody can get through the front door. It's another thing is what can they do in the environment once they're in there? And there's a lot of things that the defenders can do today, not all of which are fully implemented, that would actually prevent the exfiltration, the damage, the ransom from happening, even if somebody can break into your network.
Horacio, I know Booz is also focused very much on post-quantum and quantum cryptography, and one of my first mentors in this space was Mike McConnell, Admiral McConnell, great American, and a Booz Allen, and actually Larry Wright before him. So I've worked with some of these folks for a long time because you've been at the front edge of many of these issues for a long time. But what should we be thinking about from a post-quantum environment, and what is it you are doing to help your government clients and others?
So as you know, and I think most of the audience knows, quantum is not quite here yet, from the standpoint that we don't have commercial quantum computers that can do this. But what do they say about this? There's a famous saying about going bankrupt. You go like slowly and then all at once.
Let's hope not.
I think this is what's going to happen to quantum. Is like we're going to talk about it as something that's coming slowly, and much like it happened with AI and large language models, then it goes vertical. And before that happens, we need to transform the way we're doing encryption and encryption management in order to harden our defenses. There's adversaries vacuuming huge amounts of encrypted data right now, sitting it in storage in anticipation of being able to crack it someday. So this is not I'm going to wait until quantum is here, because what you have in your networks now, if somebody can vacuum it, they may not be able to read it today, but maybe they'll read it in 3 years. And what kind of a risk do you want to take on that? We're working already with a number of forward-leaning CISOs across the world, really, who are thinking through this problem. And what's been most interesting to me on this is, this starts with, do you actually understand what type of encryption do you have in your network, in the different parts, and what type of encryption do you have, especially against the crown jewels of your intellectual property, the crown jewels of your networks, the crown jewels of your OT environments, and are you comfortable with those? And if not, what is your, because we're not going to be able to replace all of encryption into post-quantum algorithms overnight. In fact, a lot of these algorithms are sophisticated enough that there's a ton of infrastructure right now that simply doesn't have the compute capacity to operate them. So there's this has the PQE effort has to start 3 years ago, but certainly now.
Well said.
And well ahead of you don't want to start the Y2K effort in 2001.
Yeah.
I think we are in this moment now where it's important to understand, to prioritize, and to begin to act. And again, a number of our customers are beginning to move in that direction. Just not enough of them, not quickly enough. Again, here's a place where AI is going to be super helpful, because you can build the agentic structure that can go into each device in your network and understand what encryption is it running and how easy would it be to crack from a PQE perspective.
Horacio, the way you frame that just triggered with me in a positive way, because I like to say we've let our enemies define our strategy for too long. We know it's not here yet, but it's coming. That I think we can all 100% agree on. And I don't want to sound alarmist, but of all the races to win, this is at the very top of the list. From a national security standpoint alone, if you can keep all your secret and crack everyone else's, game over, right? So what other thoughts in terms of being able to get ahead of, we tend to react, and there's nothing better than when we respond, we literally throw everything at it, and I will put the U.S. At the top of anyone, anywhere. But we have some of these opportunities where we see it coming. What can we do to actually get in front of it?
So I think both the challenging and the exciting part of the moment that we're in is that it is almost impossible to say, well, this is the top priority. Because I can make an argument that the AI stack is the top priority, that quantum is the top priority, that space is the top priority, that the intersection of all of these things
Water,
is
electricity,
the top. So
fair.
But our country has a unique advantage, truly asymmetric advantage, which is an economic system that propels innovation, right? And so this is the moment to continue to accelerate the innovation engine of the country. I think that the last panel began to touch on this. We've been arguing for a whole of nation approach to all of these topics. We really don't have to prioritize. You have startups working on quantum. You have large companies like us working on quantum and working on AI. You have other people working on space. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but it has to be thoughtful. And it has to be built in a way that we understand that at the end of the day, we're heading towards convergence. I'm not smart enough at this point to fully understand where AI and quantum will converge. It's quite possible that AI will design quantum, and it's quite possible that quantum will power AI.
Well said.
But we don't need to sit here and try to figure that out. And certainly my head will explode before I ever get anywhere near trying to figure that out. but we just need to unleash the power of our economic system so that we continue to stay ahead. I don't think managed economies, while they may have some advantages in the short term, can deal with these problems with the scale, the speed, and the precision that is going to be required.
Actually, that was very insightful. It brings it back to sort of commander's intent, but not the specifics, the 10 Commandments etched in stone. At the end of the day, that is what differentiates, and that's sort of the geopolitical, geostrategic enabler the United States has, right?
100%.
You know, I mentioned a pessimist is an optimist with experience. I'm still optimistic. What are you optimistic about? And since we're near the end of our time, or actually past it, what's one thought that maybe I didn't ask that I should have? I got down to 2 of the 10 questions I was hoping to get to.
Ultimately, again, as an immigrant to this country, I'm so in love with this nation because I'm in love with the people of this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ultimately that is going to be what's going to win all of these fights. It's going to be people with the creativity, the drive, the innovation, the capacity to get all of this done. I don't think that there's another country in the world that comes anywhere close. And that's what gives me hope that we're going to take each one of these challenges and turn them into an opportunity by just letting Americans do what we do best.
Very thoughtful. That is the American dream encapsulated in a real world example, from intern to CEO to at one of the finest companies in the world. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us today, and thank you for continuing to be that optimist, because at the end of the day, I think most people don't dream about being born in Beijing or Pyongyang or Moscow. So bottom line, thank you, and thank you for joining us today and for your sponsor.
Thank you.
So, thank you. We are going to take a very quick bio break, and then I'm going to turn it over to our COO, Nick Sellers, for our panel on critical infrastructure and operators. Thank you, Ross.
Okay, if everybody can take their seats, we'll get going. Thank you. Thanks so much. We're ready to get going. Frank, everybody's going to follow you. Folks, y'all ready to go? Thank you. I needed Tom Fanning to say, let's go. Everybody will sit down. What a great morning we've had so far. Welcome back. I hope everybody enjoyed the break and the conversation. If the previous remarks were any indication, we've got a lot of ground to cover this afternoon in this discussion. We just heard from senior leaders responsible for defending our nation's networks and critical infrastructure from the government side, as well as a leading voice in industry. That was a terrific discussion with Horacio. Now we're going to dive even deeper into the private sector, which owns and operates the vast majority of the critical infrastructure here in our nation, as we know. And I hope after this discussion, you'll stay for two more really great discussions. Tom Fanning will be leading a discussion with the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure, and then finally we'll hear from Nick Anderson from CISA. So please, there's a lot more left in the program. I hope you'll stay for it. This panel brings together leaders from cybersecurity, critical infrastructure, understanding the entire threat landscape, threat intelligence, industrial control systems, and the networks to keep the lights on. Each of them sit at a different intersection of technology, policy, and operations, and each brings a perspective that we need to hear. Quickly, I'll introduce our panelists, although I know most all of you know them well, but I'll do a quick introduction. Kirsten Todd, to my immediate left, Senior VP for Cybersecurity Partnership and Engagement at Mastercard. She leads the company's collaboration with governments and global partners on cyber risk before joining Mastercard. As most of you know, Chief of Staff at CISA, co-founded Cyber Readiness Institute with CEOs from Mastercard, Microsoft, and IBM, and served as the Executive Director of the Presidential Commission on Enhancing National Security. She also co-drafted the legislation that created the Department of Homeland Security. Daniel Cruz, Vice President of Public Policy and Governmental Affairs at Palo Alto Networks, where he leads the company's engagement with Capitol Hill and the executive branch on all cybersecurity strategy. Daniel previously served as a senior official at CISA, Staff Director for House Homeland Security Committee, and Chief of Staff to Congressman Ratcliffe when he chaired the House Cybersecurity Subcommittee. To his left, Brad Maderi, Executive VP at Booz Allen. Brad leads the firm's national cyber business, thousands of cyber operators, security researchers, and software engineers building the next gen of offensive and defensive solutions for the IC, U.S. Cyber Command, FBI, CISA, and the Department of War. Brad was named a 2025 Tech 100 exec and a top 50 cybersecurity leader. And finally, Matt Hayden, Vice President of Cyber and Emerging Threats at GDIT, within their Intelligence and Homeland Security Division. Previously served as Assistant Secretary for Cyber Infrastructure, Risk, and Resilience Policy at DHS. He wrote a lot of the policies. Now it's on the other side of the table where the implementation side actually works, and very, very interested to hear more about his discussion. He was also Senior Advisor to CISA and Deputy Assistant Secretary for the private sector. All of these distinguished panelists are McCrary Senior Fellows, I'm pleased to say. Join me in welcoming them to the panel. All right, before we jump in, I'd like to set the frame. This morning, we heard from Director Cairncross, who laid out the strategic landscape, and our government leaders panel covered the policy tools, the authorities, the interagency coordination they're bringing to the fight. That was the view from inside the government. Mr. Rozanski also framed the emerging threat landscape surrounding AI. Interestingly, as I heard him speak, we increasingly are hearing how cybersecurity has got to expand to trust of intelligence systems and how we develop the trust of those intelligence systems, which are merging into everything we do in critical infrastructure. Now, the companies representing this stage don't just talk about it as well. They're building the tools, deploying the defenses, and in many cases, they sit in the chair when the adversary is already inside the network. We hear about the U.S. projecting power, and we think about the traditional domains, air, land, sea, space. Increasingly, we know it is cyber security and the cyber domain. And I was so pleased to hear the National Cyber Director and the 6 domain pillars talking about deterrence, and projecting power in that domain is just as important. We're going to talk about that more today. I want to get into 3 questions that I think every person in this room is wrestling with. First, whether the speed of AI-powered threats has fundamentally broken our existing models for defense and information sharing. Second, whether we're honest with ourselves on how exposed our supply chains really are and what zero trust actually looks like in practice. Brad, I know we just did a paper with Booz Allen on zero trust for OT in the ports. We'll talk about that. And then finally, how we make the economic case for cybersecurity investment when too many decision makers still treat cybersecurity as a cost center rather than a strategic advantage. So let's get after it. Now, I want you guys to think that we have just, these are serious topics, but we've just time traveled in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day to the Dubliner, and we're all sitting around a big table. So I want you to jump into the discussion early, and we're on round 2 here, so everybody is talking freely, all right? Kirsten, I'll start with you. At Mastercard, you're watching AI reshape both the threat landscape and defense. We talked about how fast, 15 minutes, we're now hearing 10 minutes for some of the latest agentic AI and how quickly they can get inside and get lateral in systems. Talk about fundamentally what feels different about today's risk environment and what types of intelligence or insights do organizations need to strengthen their intelligence.
Well, thank you, Nick. It's great to be here. Thank you, Frank, and congratulations to McCrary on the inaugural summit. Look forward to many more of these. And it's great to have this conversation, obviously following the fantastic panel for those that have served. And I think it's just important to note that in this moment, as we're bringing industry and government together to acknowledge just the service across our government, certainly across our armed services at this time, and to hear from the leadership around what is our national priorities, what are they when it comes to cybersecurity. So when we look at the threat, I really look at the evolving nature of risk in 2 buckets. We're looking at the geopolitical shifts as well as the technological. Geopolitically, we heard Director Cairncross talk a little bit about this. We're seeing increased fragmentation. And that increased fragmentation really leads to challenges from a defensive perspective, from an inability or a difficulty to share insights, to share data, to share telemetry. Technologically, we've heard a lot about it this morning, and it kind of comes into a few different categories. Obviously, we know that attackers are using technology to their advantage. We're seeing attackers using generative AI, LLMs at scale. Recorded Futures State of Security report that talked about 2025 talked about prompt lock, which was the first known AI-powered ransomware that was developing malicious scripts in real time. This is just an example. We've certainly seen a lot of this across the space. We heard Brett Leatherman talk a lot about cyber-enabled fraud. We at Mastercard are very focused on helping to prevent fraud and scams. The increase in that has been exponential, and we're seeing how technology is allowing for deep fakes, which is helping support the adversary with audio and video fakes, which is leading to this increase in frauds and scams. And importantly, one of the other elements is when we talking about the timing, we're seeing compressed breakout time. So that's the time to move from entry across the system. That means that our approach to defending is going from prevention, even though we still want to invest in that, and obviously that's critical, but it's very much about resilience. It's about zero trust, because the amount I think a question that was asked earlier, should we just assume, Frank asked this, that adversaries are on our network? We assume this pre-positioning, but with technology now, we're seeing this happen even more so. But the real immediate risk right now is verification failure. We're seeing, that deception is becoming faster, cheaper, and so AI is getting embedded into decision models. So what that means is we're seeing many more identity-centric risks, which mean that the adversary now goes from needing to break in, needing to use malware to hack through a firewall, to the adversary logging in. They're stealing and purchasing credentials, which is allowing them to get in and get across the network. So these challenges are creating, obviously, a much more complex threat environment. So what does that mean for what we need to be doing? Obviously, we need to be thinking about autonomous threat detection, how we're using this technology to detect, to respond to threats, to do this in real time, and autonomous defense. We need to be able to use machines, LLMs, to be able to identify, prioritize, block these threats in real time. At Mastercard, we've invested in something called Decision Intelligence Pro, which is really looking at decisioning and advanced telemetry. So what this does, and decisioning allows industries and organizations to make decisions in real time, to assess risk in real time. What this capability does is it aggregates, it combines generative AI with advanced global telemetry data to then be able to evaluate up to 1 trillion data points so that it can score transaction risks for banks in real time in under 50 milliseconds. So what we're doing is looking at how do we use this technology, how do we use all of the tools that we see our adversaries using, but to prevent fraud, to be able to also give a better threat picture. We also have a capability that's blocked over $77 billion worth of fraud in up to 7 years, that's assessing risks in real time and be able to communicate those to merchant and acquirers. So as we look at this, we see the buckets of challenges coming in, the geopolitical piece, certainly technology, but technology that while it's being used by our adversary, we have the opportunity, certainly from infrastructure, to use this to be able to prevent and mitigate the threats that are coming our way to secure a more resilient infrastructure.
So you've been on both sides of it, government now, industry side. With this advanced threat, are we doing enough on the threat intelligence sharing? Is there more we can continue to do?
It's a great question for me because we acquired Recorded Future a year ago. And so the whole point of that was to really look at how do we build out our picture. So Mastercard is unique because of its visibility across the ecosystem. So we see broad, through the payment networks, we see a broad swath of what's happening. We're able to look at criminal behavior. We're able to see emerging patterns. When you merge and connect the insights from the payment network with what we're seeing from the Recorded Future threat data, we're able to understand criminal activity. So we can see an action happen in Germany. We can see an attacker take an act in Germany. We can see how they're pre-positioning for an event in Thailand, how they're refining tactics to then go after Australia. What's important, though, it's not just about us doing this. It's about how do we then work with governments to create a more secure national infrastructure. And importantly, one of the things that we're obviously focused on is how do we create a more global secure infrastructure by sharing this data. And we'll talk more about this, but we're embedding in law enforcement agencies, in Europol, in the Secret Service. It's that collaboration that the government panel talked about earlier that's so critical.
Really good. Daniel, Brad, Matt, I want to bring you guys into the conversation specifically around implementation of zero trust. Daniel, I know you've talked a lot about how operators are drowning in noise, and we got to increase the signal to noise ratio here. Brad, you guys are doing literally world-leading, cutting-edge efforts around offensive and defensive cyber. And Matt, I know you guys are doing so much with the Air Force around this as well. Talk a little bit about what zero trust actually means in practice. How is it being implemented to better protect America's military installations and our critical infrastructure assets? Brad, I'll start with you.
Talking about, which is this whole idea of threat intelligence. And, we've been in this threat intelligence game for a long time. And I think back over the last 10 plus years. Thanks, Matt. Nice assist from GDIT. Thank you. But I think back over the last 10 years from a threat intelligence perspective, and it started with, intelligence professionals analyzing open source data and looking at campaigns and trends. And then we moved into, CrowdStrike, Microsoft, companies that actually instrument networks, identifying what they've seen and being able to do that at scale and be able to kind of crowdsource that and share that. What's interesting when I think about the conversation that Frank and Horacio had, and as we think about cyber at machine speed, the point I go back to is the adversary gets a vote. And in the report that we wrote, one of the things we looked at the trend line. And if you look at the trend line, we've seen China release Villager, an open source red teaming framework, and they released that to the world. Interestingly enough, it actually had a keylogger and a rat in it. And so we were actually, all the folks that downloaded it were actually helping them train their model, right? And so we were giving them new TTPs. Now you look at recently with Anthropic Claude, where, for the first time, LLMs using open source software, or LLMs sourcing vulnerabilities against open source software, found 500 new vulnerabilities. And in our lab, one of the things that we're doing is we take CVEs, and at the point where a CVE is published, we can actually generate a new exploit from that CVE code in 5 minutes. And so if you think about threat intelligence, we've built a world that relies on intelligence based upon what we've seen. And we're entering this new interesting state where threat intelligence has to shift towards not what we've seen, but what we're going to see.
Really good.
And so I think that we're entering this new age of speed and scale. We talk a lot about the impacts that AI is going to have. I think we need to get really grounded in the conversation around, okay, so what does that mean? One, it means that the adversary is going to be able to exploit a vulnerability in record time. Two, they're going to be sourcing and finding vulnerabilities faster than we've ever seen before. And we're going to see attacks happen at a much broader scale. I really think the first area we're going to see this come to life is probably in the ransomware space. Criminals are crafty. These capabilities are going to become democratized, and criminals are going to make a lot of money. Now, Brett has the decryption key, so maybe that will be good. But we're going to see sort of this unprecedented set of wave of paradigm shift and attacks. So from a zero trust perspective, I think that we've made a tremendous amount of progress as an industry and a community around implementing a foundational set of controls. I think sometimes zero trust has become an unused an overused buzzword, but the reality is in DoD, zero trust is 7 pillars, 152 controls. And if you implement foundational controls around identity, around devices, then you're going to be able to actually assume breach and actually have better resiliency within your network. And also, I think one of the things that we're seeing with the implementation of zero trust more broadly across DoD is that we're also saving a lot of money. We have a tremendous amount of tech debt in our infrastructure. And by actually looking at the convergence of IT operations and security operations, modernizing with zero trust controls, the department's saving a ton of money. We've seen $350 million of cost cut out of the defense enterprise with the implementation of Thunderdome. It's pretty significant.
Excellent. Daniel, talk a little bit more about it from your perspective.
Absolutely. And I echo my colleagues here in thanking Frank and the McCrary Institute for hosting this summit here today. I think in zero trust, as Brad mentioned, sometimes you have to back away from the buzzword and look holistically. What are we really talking about? And every year, Palo Alto Networks, we release our annual incident response report, which highlights the trends we are seeing across 750 plus, the proverbial 3 a.m. phone call when you're at the cleanup in aisle 6, when you assist an organization, sometimes public sector, sometimes private sector at their toughest hour, help them not just bounce back, but hopefully bounce forward from a really serious cyber incident. And there's a few statistics from that annual report, which to me reinforce why we're having this conversation about zero trust. This last year, in 87% of our incident response cases, the attackers targeted multiple attack surfaces at once. So network, cloud, endpoint, identity. We often talk about zero trust as the reason to have a layered defense. So if someone gets in the front door, the blast radius is contained. I would posit that there no longer is just a front door. There are now many doors that the attackers are all targeting at the same time. Second stat I will highlight is that just in the last year, attack time from initial exploit to exfiltration or operational disruption, 4 times faster than just the year before. So put those two together. What is that telling us? It's telling us the attackers are coming at us from all angles at all times, and they are faster than ever before. That right there is the imperative for zero trust. And so we have technology, and Palo Alto Networks and other vendors are proud of our technology, proud to partner with Booz and some great work for the Department of War. We have controls those technologies are aligned to. But at the end of the day, it is recognizing that fact. Attackers are coming from all angles. They are faster than ever before. So we need not just the technology, but this cross-cutting culture and spirit of continuous re-verification, continuous inspection across all users, all assets, all devices at all times. That is the zero trust imperative. And I do think we are making really good progress ahead of a lot of the 2027 deadlines. And as Brad mentioned, it's not just a security imperative. It is also an operational efficiency and mission resilience imperative. So we've got to keep the pedal to the metal.
Agree. And before I get to Matt, I want to press in on I know you are deeply involved in the transformation on AI-powered SOC. Palo Alto. I know you came from the government side where you really helped on the implementation of state and local cybersecurity grant program across America. And this is deeply important to the McCrary Institute. We're partnered with the state of Alabama running the State Security Operations Center, the Alabama Cybersecurity Intelligence Center, where we're providing real-time endpoint monitoring and detection to cities and counties and rural water systems. And we're hearing more and more about the need to have an AI-powered SOC and what that means. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I will leave you with an optimistic message here after some of the scare the crap out of you statistics I just gave. when we think about the importance of an AI-powered SOC, it actually comes from my favorite part, perhaps, of the national cyber strategy, or most underappreciated, is actually a line in the chapeau that says, it's time to stop tinkering around the edges. I might actually just make that a bumper sticker. You can all have one. But what I love about that is it recognizes that sort of incremental improvements, there's nothing wrong with incremental improvements, but when we think about the power dynamic and the calculus between the adversaries and the defenders, what we really need is to flip the paradigm altogether. Incremental improvements is probably not going to cut it. So if you believe that, recognizing that, we take a step back and look at the landscape right now. And what we are seeing is sort of what I'll call, apologies for the sports analogy, a first and goal problem, which is either really depressing or really optimistic, depending on how you look at it. There has been awesome concerted effort, policy, and investment from the cyber community to invest in tools and sensors to close visibility gaps over the last 5+ years. Dating back to SolarWinds, we realized we had visibility gaps. A lot of investment and policy promulgation around endpoint, around cloud logging, around identity. This was all worthy and necessary. But we have sort of neglected the bottleneck. All of that investment in those tools and sensors created new data layers coming into the same SOC stuck in 2008 with an overworked analyst who is trying to play alert whack-a-mole while critical alerts are missed and there are operational breakdowns for them. So if you look at that, that's actually kind of an encouraging message there, where there's this bottleneck where if we have an intentional effort to address that bottleneck, we can meaningfully translate cyber investment into cyber outcome, right? That's not incremental improvement. That is not tinkering around the edges. That is actually transformative. And I use that word deliberately. And that's not hypothetical. That is there for the taking for everyone here in this room today or tomorrow if you want. And as evidence of that, we have seen across our 70,000 plus customer base, when customers switch from legacy SOC practices, i.e. all the tooling coming in to this manual stale whack-a-mole, to an AI-powered SOC, they go from an average 2 to 3 days for their mean time to respond, which we think is one of the best cyber vital signs. It just describes exactly what it sounds like. How long does it take you to respond and contain an incident? They go from 2 to 3 days to 60% under 10 minutes. That is not tinkering around the edges. 2 to 3 days to 10% under 60 minutes. So there are no silver bullets, but what if as a community, to ensure that we translate cyber investment into measurable improvements in cyber outcomes, what if we had a targeted effort to go after the bottleneck and we could unlock that together? That is why I'm an optimist.
Love it.
Yeah, just a quick thought around this whole AI-enabled SOC. RSA is next week, and there'll be 6,000 product companies. 3,000 of them will be zero trust companies, and the other 3,000 will be AI-enabled SOC. Palo Alto is the best, of course.
Agentic on every billboard.
Right. But the reality is, I think that as we think about this SOC of the future, I think we've got to be really careful about applying the paradigm of the past to the future. And I think it's an opportunity. And I think as we think about operations in the future, this notion that Horacio hit on around convergence, we're going to see a convergence of IT operations, security operations, and even DevSecOps, right? Because if you think about a vulnerability or an issue within your enterprise, you may need to patch the perimeter. That's your IT operations team. You may need to actually do a detection and response event. That's your SOC team. You may need to push a build of one of your high value assets and new systems. That's going to have to go through DevSecOps. I think if we keep thinking about all of these things in silos, that we're just going to automate a process that's already fundamentally flawed and is not going to be resilient and fast enough to move at the speed of the threat of the future. So I think this whole notion of convergence around SOC, NOC, DevSecOps, I think the other piece is the whole SOC world today is based upon this detection and response model and this kind of epicenter. I also see things moving much more to the edge. We're going to need to be able to kind of identify, triage, and actually remediate at the point of impact, as opposed to going through a long supply chain or a long kind of workflow and process that's very human intensive today.
I want to talk more about supply chain. It's perfect segue. Matt, I know you guys are doing tremendous work at GDIT around all of this with your clients. Well, in particular, your military customers that you're working with, but can you talk about your view with respect to zero trust implementation, what it means, and pull in the AI powered capability sets to the extent that that is part of it as well.
Thank you. And thanks to McCrary as well. One of the things that we have is that when you have a primary customer set that is state and local and the federal government, you kind of take on their mission area. So our mission area is citizen services. It is well-functioning government. It is security outcomes that are above enterprise security. It's cybersecurity for the purpose of mission accomplished as well as traditional government function. And so when we take a look at that, we start saying, okay, well, where do we have some of the strongest capabilities that are brought to us from our experience? And a lot of that comes from insider threat. Because when you start talking about behaviors, that's where we really start to lean into zero trust. Zero trust is the ability to know when a valid account is doing something it shouldn't, or when a valid network is behaving uniquely. Those behaviors aren't just inscribed in a tablet that you can just compare against. So you have to have the ability to really recognize behavior across the board. I will tell you, there are teams that are working cybersecurity that include a behavioral psychologist, and you come in and you get that expertise layer to bring to bear, where you start layering in understanding of what those security outcomes mean to your capital leadership as well as your senior leadership. And you're talking to them about what could be disclosed, what could be disrupted, and where those pinch points are. And that's where a lot of the supply chain conversation goes to, is how do we stop the pipeline of risk from the very beginning all the way through to the end, and how do we identify it, just like Brad said, at the time of ingest? And a lot of that is now at the DevSecOps layer, where you don't just have, is this bad code? We actually have to identify, is this adversarially written good code? You have to actually know who created that open source component. And you have to say, okay, while this may 2 + 2 = 4, a bad guy wrote it and a bad guy might edit it. And we can't have that in our patch cycle. So you not only have to be an intelligence expert, you have to also be a logic expert as well. And so it brings a lot into that world. When we also look at this, we also have to take into effect our supply chain also has to be years in advance. So we don't get the luxury, especially when you're talking with the government and large platforms and large investment, of having a tomorrow supply chain that you didn't make a lot of decisions months and years in the past. So we have to be able to revise our existing supply chains, put on new constraints, put on new demands, and move that as well. When we look at enterprises as a whole, it's also the way they talk to other agencies. So it's not just a singular enterprise, it's that API connection, it's that data exchange, and it's also the ability to be dynamic, because we've seen this administration really want to lock in on how do we appreciate the value each agency contributes in the whole. We heard whole of government really loud and clear, but we didn't hear how each agency is communicating into a group project. And that is one where you have to be able to make systems that are dynamic to interchange like that without having to stand up a new system every time.
Kirsten, we talked about this some. Build on what Matt said, please, from your perspective, both inside government and now what you're seeing from the industry side. We watched these supply chain attacks cascade from single vendors to thousands. Too often, cybersecurity is still treated as an IT expense for most organizations rather than a national security investment. I don't care if you're leading a large organization, you've got to think that way. From both sides of it, government and industry, why is the economic case for cybersecurity still so hard to make? And what is it going to change in that calculus before the next catastrophic event forces it?
It's a great question, because I think, certainly from where I sit at Mastercard, cyber risk is economic risk, right? We have to understand the economic implications of cyber incidents to understand where to invest. And your point about national security, I think, is really important, because, all of us, our companies were not started with national security in mind. They were started for different reasons, for technology, for financial, for infrastructure. But I think something that happened a couple of years ago is striking. In October of 2023, the intelligence directors of the Five Eyes came to Silicon Valley to talk to the leaders of tech companies to say, you are now part of our national security infrastructure of the world. You have a responsibility to work together for collective defense. And this is a much bigger issue than just the issue of a technology company or technology innovation. And I think that gets to the point that's sort of been touched on and has been touched on earlier today, which is it's collective defense, but it's also, to Matt's point, how are we all working together, whole of government, whole of industry? And no better indicator of what that means than when you're looking at the economy. John Huntsman is a leader at Mastercard, and he talks about leaders of countries are focused on the economy, how to protect their citizens, and work. in workforce. So it's looking at how is the economics of all of this underpinning what we're doing. There's also no greater example than what we just saw last year with Jaguar Land Rover. Mastercard has an economics institute, and it does assessments of incidents and what the economic impact of them are. And so it's looked at Colonial Pipeline, it's looked at the Asahi Brewing Company. But JLR last August is fascinating. It cost JLR $735 million. So they had a breach that was likely happened from stolen credentials. It shut the company down for 5 weeks. It affected 5,000 suppliers. What's fascinating about that as well is it's not just the supply chain or the supply chain as we think about it. It meant that the companies that existed around the plant that were restaurants, convenience stores, dry cleaners, they all went out of business. That cost the economy of the UK $2.5 billion. It contracted the GDP of the UK immediately afterward by 0.1%. And the answer was for the UK government to bail out JLR with a $2 billion loan. So those are real numbers. That's statistically significant. That's talking about the economic impact. So what we're looking at is how can we provide greater understanding about these economic implications to then help governments, help industries make strategically informed decisions about where to invest. We know cyber is important, but how do you invest in this as it's looking at the economy? Mastercard's invested over $12.7 billion in cyber over the last 7 years. Everybody has invested a lot. The point is this is a priority because of what it's doing to the economy. And, we've talked a lot about silos. The interdependencies of cybersecurity across the economy have never been more urgent to understand and more urgent to address. So looking at that, we've got to understand how can we address these issues to create a more secure economic infrastructure.
I think you're bringing up a great point, and that is Director Cairncross just spoke earlier about how our government is shaping the adversary behavior and promoting sensible regulation, but industry is the one that is writing the checks. You've done serious research on it, on the economics of cybercrime. Daniel, I know Palo Alto talks about cybersecurity outcomes over compliance checklists. Brad, Booz Allen advises agencies making billion-dollar decisions routinely on this. I want to open this up to all of you. Brad, I'll start with you here. If you had 5 minutes with an appropriator or staff leader or leaders of the industry in this room, what is the one metric, the one data point, the one argument that actually moves the needle on cybersecurity investment?
I think that right now we spend a lot of money on tools and technologies, but we have a hard time assessing outcomes. And I really think that we need to move into an environment where we have, clear metrics that define the outcomes that we need to achieve and measure progress against there. Going back to your question in terms of, we've been talking about cybersecurity for a long time, and why are we still looking at this to some extent as a back office expense? I also think through, in my life, one of the things that shaped the career path that I'm on today is September 11th. And I remember I was in Tyson's Corner. I was actually working with a lot of startups building .coms when the plane hit the Pentagon. And I remember standing on the roof of the building, and in Tyson's, you could see smoke coming out of the Pentagon. And I remember, I want to be in that fight. And that led me into counterterrorism, and it led me into cybersecurity. And today in cyber, we see lots of cyber events throughout the world. But in general, we've kind of become conditioned that, okay, it's going to be something that that Mastercard writes off, or some retailer. It hasn't had real effect on us that we can visibly see from an economic perspective or a public safety perspective. I think we are entering a unique time there in terms of what we're seeing with Iran. Now we have a fairly sophisticated nation state with a reasonable set of cyber capabilities, now with some strategic intent to potentially impose cost or harm against us. And we've seen that with Stryker. But I think that, I think as this starts to more broadly affect the general public, we'll start to see it as more part of the conversation.
Daniel, you've worked in these committees of jurisdiction. I know you talk to them routinely. What's your message here?
We often go back to, let's use this as a wake-up moment to galvanize an intense focus on return on cyber investment. It sounds really simple, but I do think as a community, and it's all been well-intentioned, but we have been a little bit stuck in this cycle of thing happens, we dissect where we were blind, where there were the blind spots. what we need to deploy to close those blind spots, and then we sort of dust off our hands, and then we move on to the next thing. The logical question is, are those things making us safer? Because we want to see return on our investment. We always go back and other people, some other metrics, but mean time to detect, mean time to respond, cyber vital signs, if you will. The reason I like those, the reason our company's leadership likes those, is any CEO who has no technical background of any critical infrastructure entity can understand what those means. They mean exactly what you think they do. How long does it take you to detect something might be anomalous? Then how long does it take you to contain that and check it off the list? So with all the investment that we have spent on cyber tooling over the last 12, 15 years, which has been significant, it has been righteous and defensible, and a lot of improvements have been made. I think the president and Director Cairncross should be able to go in the White House Situation Room and see for every, certainly CFO Act level agency, a real-time mean time to detect, a mean time to respond metric right there. We've invested in the things to provide the data to do that. And we actually could marshal that if we want. And I've been very encouraged by the receptiveness of the administration to how do we get out of once a year you get a stale PDF that says we did this, we did that, to a real-time posture that shows we invested in this, and as a result, the metrics you care about are improving by X amount. Like, that's the feedback loop that I think will help further justify the investment. So those are the conversations that we are pretty hard in that have been resonating.
Matt?
And I would just say the pay now or pay later risk conversation has evolved into being reactive is a choice. Proactive is where you can be. And so leaning into letting advanced tools demonstrate where risk and strategic investment is needed is where we're posturing people to move in the future. So that's where your investment is. It's taking the responding to events and being able to kind of act like an insurer of last accord and moving forward into a strategic partner that's looking to make sure that those events don't happen in the first place.
Kirsten?
Well, I'll repeat the economics piece, because I do think how we look at how we're measuring the economic impact of cyber events is critical. And it's critical to the point about planning. How do we guide both government and industry in where to invest and how to come together and have this whole approach? I also think the other piece, we're talking a lot about innovation to scale. And when we're talking about outcomes, it's very difficult to measure security and trust. But certainly from the Mastercard perspective, that's at the core of what we do. And I think that as we're innovating, and Director Cairncross talked about this as well, the security piece, we have to be doing it. Secure innovation is not an oxymoron. We can do these things together. We can do them at the same time, but we have to have the will. This is where the human in the loop is critical. We have to have the will of the humans, of leaders, to say security and trust are what we're building this infrastructure on. It's what we're innovating with. It's how we're driving forward and advancing the ideas that we have. But it's up to us to make sure that we're building those into it, because the fact that we've allowed unsafe, insecure software and hardware to exist as long as it has is we're the only ones to blame. We have the responsibility, the accountability, and the obligation as we're looking at AI innovation and all of these ideas about technology and how we're using them to really build this security and trust into that from the beginning.
Really good. And each one of you as senior fellows here, you're individually on behalf of your organizations and collectively working with our task forces, helping to advance these very issues and policies forward. And we're grateful for it. I have to ask you, every one of you have moved between government and industry in your work. You've seen the intelligence, you've written the policies, now you're building the solutions. Matt, I want to come back to you first. What is the one thing that the government still needs to figure out about how the private sector actually defends critical infrastructure? And what's the one thing industry needs to own up to?
Well, it is a group homework project. It's not one or the other. One of the things we haven't heard very loudly are the two dates, 27 and 29. 27 is when we're expected to have our critical infrastructure held at risk by nation-state adversaries. Hard stop. You're either able to defend it or you better be resilient. That date is coming faster than anyone's investing or hardening against. The second date, 2029, that's when we have to have a new idea on encryption and new encryption in place, or to be able to deal with everyone's secrets spilled in the streets. If you were to stop and talk to our federal partners about that, they know that. They just aren't cleared to speak to it that cleanly. So let's be very clear. There are two dates in the next 3 years that are cataclysmic for everybody's enterprise as well as their home. And when we start to talk about how we can work on that together, we have to look at the fact, use the example of cars and autonomous driving. If you had a new autonomous car that would guarantee it'd never be in a wreck, and you got as many sold as you could in a year, you still have, as a parent of teenage drivers everywhere that are going to slam into that car and it's going to be a problem. So we don't have a silver bullet that's going to say, okay, if every enterprise does X, we're going to be fine. It has to be a battle, wartime mentality across all of our sectors where we are prepared not just to pick up the phone, as Director Cairncross said, to actually have trust in our information exchange. I want there to be a KEV list that is dynamic. I want there to be a SOC of the future that gets that KEV list and says, not only do you have these vulnerabilities, but these are your top 3 you have to do this week. These are the ones that need to be autonomously addressed if this changes again. And it has to be dynamic, and it has to be mission critical, and it has to be effective. We then have the general public challenge, because if you open up a new laptop from a big box store today and connect to the internet, it's owned. This is why you do not get a laptop new out of the box from your enterprise. They put security tools and patches across the board. If you don't have security in mind, you can't pull this off. And if you ask the average kid who gets a laptop for high school, have they installed their security software before they opened it up to see what it could do? They're not going to. And it becomes a part of AI-enabled distributed denial of service attacks. You can now collectively grab all of these devices that are in consumers' hands and make it a giant disruption tool of any critical function of your choice. And even with the mighty speeds of companies like Cloudflare, they're seeing those spikes almost become insurmountable. So while I am saying there's a lot of challenge at our feet, it really comes down to we've got to operate at a weaponized partnership, not just a partnership layer.
Really good. Daniel, and then I want to go to Brad. The one thing that you believe our government partners still need to figure out about how the private sector actually defends, and one thing industry needs to do to step up right now as the pace is quickening.
You can't secure what you can't see. Sounds really simple. We've talked today about some of these target-rich, resource-poor sectors like water. We, of course, can't expect them to alone defend themselves against a sophisticated nation-state adversary. But we see across the board, for all the talk about zero trust and AI-powered SOCs and the agentic future, we still see some fundamental issues across government agencies and then pick your critical infrastructure sector, oftentimes off by 50, 70, 80%, just an understanding of what you have exposed on the internet. If you don't know that denominator, then you're just walking on a shaky foundation. If we can figure that out first, that's a foundation where we can figure out the best partnership model on top of that.
Well said.
And so we're engaged across all 16 critical infrastructure sectors. And so I think about some of the work that we do in terms of cybersecurity assessments. We'll go into a water treatment facility. We'll go into, a power grid, a manufacturing facility. And one of the things that constantly in the beginning surprised me, probably unfortunately not anymore, is just the tremendous amount of tech debt. And, you walk into a manufacturing facility and you realize that, they capitalize that over a period of 20 years, best case. And so you're walking in, looking at knowing your environment. Well, you're running operating systems from 1994 and 1995. And, then you move up from there. And so a lot of these environments are like the Smithsonian of IT. And so I think it's important as we work this shared responsibility of defending our critical infrastructure. One is starting with an understanding of the place that these organizations are at. They've got a tremendous amount of tech debt. And then trying to help them bring them along on the journey based upon what they have. What are the most effective controls you can put in place to buy down that risk to an acceptable level?
Excellent. Kirsten, I want to leave you with the last word here for us. What's the one thing you want to emphasize to the folks in the room and all the many individuals who are watching this today in terms of what we need to prioritize as the pace is quickening here with the fight between industry and government and technology leaders to do better to win this?
I think we've talked about it in different ways. It's what does this collaboration bring us toward? And I think we're looking at how do we enable systemic resilience. We've had this conversation today about what resilience means. Is it about coming back, bouncing forward? Is it about preventing? Resilience is about strengthening, and it's about moving forward. How do we enable systemic resilience in supply chain? Matt touched a little bit about on this, but I think this is critical because when we're thinking about technology, when we're talking about innovation, the supply chain element to this is so important. Brett Leatherman talked about the FBI's Operation Winter Shield. It talks about securing third-party suppliers. But I think to the other point that Brad made earlier, we have to be ahead of this. We have to be proactive. Threat intelligence, the sharing of intelligence across industry, across government, allows us to understand where's the threat going? How can we see where the indicators are for what the future looks like? It gives us an opportunity to defend against that. But importantly, when we're doing that, we have the opportunity to proactively look at building what is the future-focused vision that we want to build, and how do we do that together? I think that the strategy lays out these core tenets of how we can be more secure. We've talked a lot about how we can build that resilience, and I think it's incumbent upon industry and government to work together to lay out and set forward that future-focused vision, not just from a defensive perspective, but what are we looking to build and what are we seeing to help build a more secure and resilient infrastructure, but importantly, nation and world.
Very, very well said. I think the through line here is clear. The pace is quickening. We've not seen anything like this before. This new world order, it's a gross understatement to say that the speed is really moving like we've not seen before. And the through line, I think here today is that a trusted platform, having the relationships to have this discussion and to move fast and share threat intelligence is critical. Folks, please give these folks a round of applause. Thank you. Very much appreciate that. I now want to turn it over to Tom Fanning. Tom's going to moderate our final panel of the day, featuring representatives from the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure, former executive chairman and CEO of Southern Company, one of the most respected voices in the energy sector. Y'all, please welcome Tom Fanning. Tom, the floor is yours. Well done.
Just 2 seconds more on Tom, because anyone who knows the importance of the role of industry knows that Tom Fanning has been both a Paul Revere and a George Washington put in one. We heard an amazing CEO today in Horacio, but 10 years ago, there was only one who could speak as eloquently and as focused as Tom Fanning could. And we've been co-conspirators in a number of things over the years, and just thrilled that Tom stood up the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure, and thrilled that he could join us today. So Tom, thank you.
Come on up, fellas. Come on. Is Jeff here? Oh, there you go. You know, I just had a birthday, I think 2 days ago. I feel like Paul Revere.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thanks. I got this. How you doing, bud? Well, so joining me on stage, Jeff Baumgartner, Chief Security Officer of Berkshire Hathaway, Charla Arts, AVP of Security and Resilience Policy. There we go. But you know what? There's so many other people here, and I just want to call out just a few more folks. Michelle Guido, Executive Director of the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure. Anything good that happens out of this effort, she's the arms and the legs. Britt DeWitt, Mastercard, Matt Gord, AIG, Chris Boyer, AT&T. I think they're all in attendance. But we also have folks, Lumen, JP Morgan, Con Ed out of New York City. Look, the tri-sector has been around forever. And I also just want to say, really over 15 years, I'm going to tell a quick story about that. That when you look at what Salufo is doing here with the McCrary Center, is a real service to America, and elevating these issues, putting people in place to articulate these issues is so important. And my dear friend back there, Chris Inglis, has served this country so well for so long at NSA, Cyber Command, anything this guy has ever done, graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, right? And teaching at the Naval Academy. I mean, this guy's done everything. He's fabulous. Well, he's a great partner of mine too. And we were both partners on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. So thank you for your contribution. Hey, look, the predecessor to the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure has been around, no kidding, about 15 years in different forms or fashions. It was funny, I was chairing the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council for just about a decade, 9 years or so. And I had the chance to go off to the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. I was the only private sector CEO kind of guy on that commission. It was fascinating. Early on in the cyberspace solarium, on the ESCC, it was very clear to me that while electricity and then it broadened to energy worked well in a silo, and I think the people that you saw here today to talk about ETAC and some of the things that are going on, they're doing a terrific job. But we can't operate in a silo. Our interconnectedness with everything, what we love to say about energy back then is, yeah, we're 4% of the economy, but we're the first 4%. And without us, everything falls down. So I started reaching out to people that had this view that even thinking about securing energy was just so short-sighted. I think it was sufficient for the industry, but it was insufficient for America. And we quickly recruited like-minded individuals from finance, from communications. And we created this thing. It was a coalition of the willing called the Tri-Sector Group. That has been around for a long time. And just recently, I guess, we created now a 501c6, for heaven's sakes, to formalize it a little bit, because these issues are getting bigger and bigger. And I think we needed a little more discipline and structure. And when we thought about the Tri-Sector Group, we had these common principles, but listen, the mission is spreading out very quickly. It isn't just energy, finance, and communications. Right now, we're working with folks in the water sector. That's challenging because of how dispersed they are. Transportation, airlines, trucking, railroads, things like that. And we know health and human services, chemicals, and others right behind. So we've got to think about a way to distinguish this effort. And I think it really looks at two things. One is our perspective is owners and operators, and therefore we are desperately concerned with consequence management. Yeah, look, I get the idea the attack vectors that we talk about today are kind of cyber and physical related, right? But it's the outcomes to society is what we have to worry about. And I used to say in energy, oh yeah, energy security breeds economic security, breeds national security. Well, you know what? Every bit of critical infrastructure has that same kind of characteristic. And that's what I think we are so faithful to. So now, forget my soliloquy. Jeff, so we have 4 pillars to the formation of the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure. What are they?
Yeah. So number one, Tom talked a little bit about our history and how we were the Tri-Sector Group, and that really was the foundation of the policy pillar. So that's number one, and that's kind of our roots. And so we'll keep that, and we're pretty mature in that space and thinking about policy and influencing policy, understanding the impacts of that. The second one is intelligence collaboration, and really kind of an expansion, right? I mean, when you do policy long enough, you recognize that there are other opportunities for those companies and those teams to work together. And I think intelligence collaboration was a natural kind of evolution of that trusted relationship that we built working on policy issues. So that's really understanding kind of an exchange between us, but also encouraging the exchange from member companies back and forth with the federal government. The third one is collective response, and again, there's only so many levers that you can pull in policy. So much information that you can share, and you have to recognize that things are going to happen, and you're going to have to respond, and not just our normal mechanisms through FEMA, whether that's communications and emergency support function 2 or energy and emergency support function 12. We're really good in those silos, but how can ACI bridge that gap across those silos and bring people together to really have a conversation about what is a priority? And I think we have a lot of good examples of the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council doing that kind of on the fly. This is really cementing in what we can do and how we can bring people together at the appropriate level to get stuff done. And that's really what we're trying to do there. The final one is resilience. So, if all else fails, let's make sure that we can have a level of maturity and resilience. And that pillar is looking at building out a framework for how we can talk about resilience across sectors. And, we each have our own terminology and lexicon and ways that we're measuring resilience maturity within our companies. How do we broaden that to make sure that we're talking the same when we speak to a finance company or a telecommunications company or even other energy companies? So those are the four kind of policy, intelligence exchange, collaboration, response, and resilience.
And I'm going to get to Charlotte here in a sec, but you represent Berkshire Hathaway. So yes, you have energy, but you have a whole lot of other things. And this notion of a systemic approach to the problem is, I think, one of the keys to what we're after at the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great advantage for me being in Berkshire Hathaway Energy, having some reach back capability to other Berkshire companies when it's appropriate, when that context and security concern or project has a nexus. It's great to be able to reach over to BNSF or Lubrizol or one of the many companies that Berkshire has. We also take advantage of that internally in our own sort of coordinated ways.
So Charlotte's one of these folks that goes back over a decade, been with us forever, the whole thing. Excel Energy is 7 or 8?
8 states.
8 states across the Midwest. And your customer base is pretty important.
Yes. Yeah. So we are electricity, we are oil and natural gas, we have nuclear, we have renewable, we have it all. But as you mentioned, we also support some really critical defense facilities that are essential to Homeland Defense and our national security mission. And because of that, we are leaning in on efforts like the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure and efforts like the Energy Threat Analysis Center, ETAC, because we're not comfortable just talking about these longstanding problems, but taking action to address them, right?
Yeah, and in fact, talk a little bit about your involvement kind of when we were just a silo to our joining with the ARC, the financial ARC, and then we joined it, and then the evolution of the ETAC, and how you still try to make that silo piece fit with the whole systemic approach.
Yeah, so at the ARC, 9 of the biggest electric utilities in the country got together to really talk about and assess the systemic risk, right? If we are hit, say, from a particular supplier perspective, what does that mean impact-wise to all of us? And more importantly, what do we do to draw down that risk, reduce that systemic risk to us? One of the ways that you go about looking at that systemic risk is understanding this intelligence that our government partners have. Oftentimes, however, the government partners with that intelligence, it's not specific, say, to the energy sector, right? It's very broad. Hey, we've got this really bad problem over here. If you go and talk to those that really understand our operations, the threat analysts that understand our operations, they'll say, maybe not that, but this for sure, right? And so the ETAC is really the first of its kind public-private partnership, true partnership, where you're bringing together those government intel analysts with our subject matter experts looking at that threat in real time, but very importantly, assessing risk reduction efforts, products that can scale across the entire industry and then also go to our cross-sector friends.
Yeah, talk about the concept of ETAC ultimately is that all of this information will be part of the national framework and that everybody will be able to access it.
Absolutely.
Kind of a little bit about, I hate this, I hate a couple words. I actually hate a lot of words. I think partnership is way overused. And I really want to focus in on the word collaboration. We when we did the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, there was all this cooperation and all this other garbage language that doesn't mean anything. And we were really insistent on using the word collaboration. And the other word that I want us to chat about is accountability. What does it mean for the private sector to have an accountability and to collaborate with the federal government? And I don't want to leave these out, state and local governments and international. So collaboration and accountability.
Well, I think, for me, I spent several years in federal government at Department of Energy, and success meant a variety of things, but building a program and pushing information out was one of those measures. And I think collaboration is really the evolution of where we were 20 years ago or 15 years ago, of just pushing information out. And collaboration is really sitting side by side and recognizing what the problem is, being able to articulate and provide the context and perspective that both parties bring to the table, and then make that actionable. So collaboration for me is really mutual work, not one party or the other tossing something over a cavern and hoping that it's valuable for the other side, but really working on the problem together.
Building a common operating picture.
Well, give a really practical example about the collaboration, right? Is taking our government intel partners, law enforcement friends, and having them actually visit our infrastructure in the field. This is a substation. This is the kind of equipment that's in a substation, right? This is the communications that we use, networks that we use to communicate to these remote facilities, right? That helps them understand when we are talking to them about the risk that we are facing and the kinds of information that we need from them, and holding them accountable for that kind of information.
And go ahead.
And I think when you get that sort of relationship going where it's not just a project, it's a true collaborative relationship, then that's when you can have that accountability.
The fact is, we depend upon each other, the private sector and government. And when I go back to the kind of really importance of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, there were so many good things that came out of there. In fact, this commission is arguably one of the most successful in American history. Now, 75+% of its recommendations are in law. And in fact, when I think about the work that the Tri-Sector Group, now the ACI, worked on, was ideation. That was the idea of collaboration. What does it look like? To policy, they got into the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. To legislation, we actually wrote laws, and you all commented, as did a whole lot of other people, on how to make those laws get through and be effective. And I would say this was a nonpartisan effort. You couldn't tell who in the room was a Democrat or Republican or anything. It was really quality government service to operationalization. And, when most of y'all know, I don't know, the genesis of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, Solarium actually came from the effort that Dwight Eisenhower put in place after World War II. And if you looked at a map, here was the emergence of the Soviet Union on your right and the emergence of NATO on your left. And the imagination of conflict was a tank battle on the plains of Poland. With the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, I think it involved, and I think the big idea was that we are not defended by oceans to our west or east, or friendly neighbors to our north or our south, and the bad guys are here. I can't speak for Southern Company. I'm retired from that 3 years ago. But during my tenure, we get attacked 3 million times a day. And we know the bad guys are here. And we know in some cases they're here now. Not only are they attacking, just kind of one-off kind of efforts. We know they're here now. Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon. So we really have to understand how to make this thing work, how to get after these guys, how to build a common operating picture. The United States government, all stop, cannot defend this nation, all stop, on their own, all stop. We must collaborate with the private sector, with government. That's kind of a big deal. Boy, I love to talk about Value is a function of risk and return. And we know that CEOs in the past, when I started down this road with whether it was the Business Roundtable or the U.S. Chamber or anything else, son of a gun, some private sector companies would look at you as if you had 3 6s on your forehead. Why is it now that we are having to change a culture that has existed for 150 years or more, laissez-faire, to one of collaboration and accountability? How are we going to change corporate cultures to do that?
Well, I mean, I think ACI has a big challenge there. I look forward to seeing how they solve it. No, I think it starts in our 4 pillars, right? And I think the work that we're doing there to align around a resilience framework, to understand how we come together across sectors, you can really articulate the value of doing those things and the added resilience to your company and your company's ability to make money and deliver a critical service to your customers when you have that framework in place. And I think that's one of the ways that we can overcome that kind of risk equation.
There was, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that in the electric sector in particular, oil and natural gas as well, regulated entities, right? We have an obligation to serve. So there is increasing awareness at that executive level within our industry of this cyber threat, the reality of it, the urgency around it, and the value that comes from investing for that continuation of those essential services. They're going to be so important when we're defending the homeland. So I think that there is increasing awareness about the importance of that investment in a regulated entity. I think our state commissions and a lot of our commissioners as well are understanding that.
I would argue too that our boards understand that protecting the infrastructure is not a back office expense. It is essential to who we are and what we do. Now, I think our big challenge in the private sector broadly will be moving from people that get that. I know finance gets that. You know, think about communications. It's a tougher problem. Is cyber resilience a thing of necessity, or is it a competitive advantage? And would that cause me from a commercial standpoint to move one way or another in terms of who my vendor is? I think they get that too. But in ultra competitive industries, it's a much tougher idea about collaborating. When we talk about building a common operating picture, I think as an aspiration, what we want is, again, a word, share. I always think about wanting to see that in real time. I would love it as an aspiration for our critical infrastructure. And when I say critical infrastructure, when I use the word or the acronym SICI, what am I talking about?
Systemically important critical infrastructure.
And so what? What is that?
It's the underpinnings of the economy, and it's the infrastructure that really supports the ability to conduct business.
Conduct business, and our national security depends on it.
Yep.
Right? So it doesn't mean everything Southern does is important. So I want to identify what are those things that are most critical from a national security standpoint. Can the government tell us what that is, or do we have to find that out for ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think we spent the first years of the tri-sector having government try to tell us what that is. And,
disaster.
And it failed horribly. I think only the people running those systems and with knowledge, both intimate of the architecture and the engineering behind it, but then also the operation, can tell you what's critical and why it's critical. Government has a role to play in identifying what they view as critical that they own.
Department of War, defense critical infrastructure.
I will emphasize what Jeff said about the collaboration. understanding the operations, right? We had a very important customer come to us and say, we think these are your most important assets. And we said, maybe, but why not these, right? That demonstrated the importance of the expertise on both sides in helping to address and really do that identification.
I like to think about the private sector's role as an aspiration again in 4 areas. This common operating picture is illuminate the battlefield in real time so that we see what's going on. And we know that not only is the attack surface changing, our own infrastructure changes all the time, but also the attack vectors change all the time. Illuminate the battlefield is kind of thing 1 in real time so that the intelligence community sees what's going on. We can learn from them. They can learn from us, so that the sector risk management agencies and all the silos that we have that are working reasonably well right now can work together better systemically. The second issue is to take action before it is required, to skate to where the puck will be. So we've got to have that kind of forward look to eliminate or lessen the impact of a bad actor. Third is respond systemically. If somebody gets through, colonial, that kind of thing, then instead of just chasing, oh man, we lost gas in a pipeline, what are all the ripple effects? So this idea of prioritization, boy, I think the private sector has a very unique perspective that can enrich in what our national security product is coming from the federal government. And finally, talk a little bit about COTE. This is the 4th thing. Continuity of the economy, COTE. What do we mean by that?
So I think continuity of the economy is really the idea that, well, we always relate it in the energy sector back to Black Start. How do you get the economy back up if it's knocked to the ground? And there's, a few hubs in America that are probably critical to really kickstarting the economy again, just like there are a few generation plants in my systems that are a little bit more important than the others in kickstarting and getting the physics of the grid back to where it needs to be so that we can actually provide service to our customers. Same type of thing we believe applies to the economy, and how do we kickstart the economy when it's down? So that's COTE to me.
That's an energy perspective. Let's think about, so the last guy left and he said, boy, if you're not ready for 27 or if you're not ready for 29, let's say the American economy, either as a preemptive or reactive condition, gets knocked to the canvas. How do we decide who goes up versus electricity versus finance versus communications versus water versus anything else? Okay. And shouldn't that be part of a war plan? We should involve all of those activities into. It was fascinating. A prior administration, not this one. And I guess I should at this point say, this administration has been terrific in terms of its forward thinking, in terms of its ability to cooperate and communicate well, how we can best work together. But when that bad day happens in America, it is not the time to use as your strategy, phone a friend. What we have to do is exercise, and we have to understand how we might work together. Talk about this idea of exercise and some of the things we have done already to get ready for that bad day.
Yeah, so electric sector in particular, every other year does the GridX national level exercise. And for the past number of those exercises, we've included our friends from the communications sector. I know that when a number of entities, individual companies do it, they bring in, their financial services sector friends, other key suppliers to really think through that prioritization of restoration of service, right? Understanding where those key elements are going to be, and then helping, importantly, our government partner friends understand those processes that exist so we can build off of those, enhance them, improve them so that we can be very responsive. Another example, right? We are pushing some of our key defense Department of War facilities to exercise with us in response to those really bad days, right? Do our radios work together? Will we be able to communicate? How will we understand where we focus our prioritization based on what you have backup for or don't have backup for, right? Importantly, if we have to re-energize lines, those lines have to be manually patrolled. If those crews are being threatened with violence because we've got societal unrest, how are we going to mutually protect those individuals to help with that improved restoration, right? That goes back to that common operating picture and that collaboration that's key to doing that response and recovery.
Well, and we've had 2 exercises at ACI, and both involving all 3 sectors, sometimes up to 5 sectors, including our government partners, and really testing our limits in what we have deemed a polycrisis, and responding in multiple sectors to cyber and physical incidents in multiple regions within the U.S. And, for us, that we liken to calling that a polycrisis. But we've had 2 of those, both very successful, both kind of affirming the 4 pillars that we have and really informing our direction and our path that we're taking down, specifically our response and resilience pillars.
And I think the purpose of an exercise, folks, is not to get a determinative answer. It is rather to build muscle memory. It is to kind of understand how we're going to work together and how we're going to improve. In no way would I suggest that where we are today as a society, how government and private sector work together is sufficient to protect this nation. We need to advance the ball. Do we have the right raw materials in place to advance the ball? Yes, absolutely. But boy, I think it is a reimagination of how we view national security. It is a completely different day in this nation. One of the things I like to talk about in terms of where we are right now, or just kind of to use movies as an example. So let's do one. Has everybody ever seen the movie Fail Safe, 1962, somewhere around there? You should all go watch it. Because in 1962, let me use that, black and white movie, the whole scenario is that we're very proud of a computer system we built to uncover largely a threat from Russia. And it's able, the computer-driven system, to identify these bombers coming over, and they look at one. They bring down the chairman of appropriations from the House, I think, and they're showing him this kind of how this system works and how it's the most advanced thing in the world. And then, son of a gun, ironically, there's an electricity shortage, and all of a sudden a blip in the system. And all of a sudden it looks as if we're being attacked by Russia. And so what do? We send up the bombers, and we're going to send them to their what they call their fail-safe point. That is, the bombers now start to kind of hang right there until they get orders or get called off. The Russians jam our ability to communicate. The bombers fly forward past the fail-safe point on their way to bomb Russia. It's a false positive. And the rest of the movie is, what do we do to call them back? I think we're entering into an age where that kind of scenario is real. And it's real because of the combination of AI and the speed of quantum computing. At some point, humans won't be able to intervene. And what we're going to have to do is build a system of controls. I don't know how yet, but I have faith that we will, that will be able to incorporate the advantages of AI and the speed of quantum computing with the judgment and the ethos that human beings have to protect us all. But isn't it a fascinating environment that we're heading into? And isn't that the 2029 that our friend that was just up here was talking about? So this fail-safe idea is something, and I guess if you fail at that effort, you become Terminator, right? The other thing that's fascinating, I think, is James Bond movies. I always love those. Sports fans, Spectre is real. And when you think about the ability to acquire and deploy cyber weapons perhaps statecraft on behalf of somebody that has very little to lose, the comfort that you may have as a society of mutually assured destruction doesn't exist anymore. And all of a sudden, Spectre, this worldwide criminal threat, is a reality that we're going to have to fight off and think differently about as a society. And that's where all of the private sector, all of cultural aspects of America have to be brought to bear to protect this nation. Think about the importance, comment, if you will, on the importance of cultural education of Americans in terms of cyber threats. This isn't just a federal, state, private sector problem. How do we get this going a la Don't Be a Litter Bug or Smokey the Bear? Intervention culturally from this nation to its citizens.
I will start by talking how we do it internally at Excel Energy, and I know a number of my peers do it well, right? Where we basically have long-standing educational campaigns, monthly meetings where we're basically telling them, you're our frontline warrior with us, right? Everything you do, every aspect of what we are, this mission here, you are a critical part of, and we need you to be aware of the threat. We need you to be aware about how the adversary is targeting you. And we need you to help in that protection by alerting us, by reporting things. That's one aspect. We then actually encourage those messages for the employees to take that back home, right? And help the people in their household understand, hey, we're getting these tools and utilizing those to help educate it.
I mean, the last panel touched on it, right? If you bring home a laptop and connect it to the internet, and it can be part of a botnet.
Yeah.
Like that. So I think it has to start much earlier, right? I mean, we have to get it further into the education system. We have to really understand the messaging that comes out that is really, civil defense and what can we do to create an American culture around security and security of your device so that you're not part of something bigger and more malicious than you ever thought possible.
And what I would like to do is tie that concept back to the concept of SICI. This idea of systemically important critical infrastructure, those assets which are critical to our national defense, this fabric of building a culture of cyber awareness is really important and critical to build the foundation up. When we think about SICI, it is only to defend those assets with the government in this aspirational way, which is totally different. This is the reimagination of national security than anything we've done before. And so tying these two concepts together raises the floor and makes kind of the ultimate structure between government and the private sector so much better. So that's something we're aiming for as well. Are there any questions from the audience at this point that we can raise? Well, if there are, let me know. On the board thing, values of function of risk and return. The expenses that we're putting together are de minimis compared to the impacts. When we think about SICI, when we think about boardroom involvement, do we really want to understand what is critical to national security and what boards and CEOs must do to be held accountable to running the enterprise, as opposed to Ben and Jerry's ice cream? Okay, we could protect Ben and Jerry's ice cream. I'm not going to deal with that. SICI must be as small as it can be in order to work with government. Talk about that idea a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the thought that we have a limited amount of time, a limited window where we can have a positive effect around whether that's civil defense or COAT or even resilience of SICI, right? And the law of small numbers will tell us that we can have the biggest impact by focusing on the most impactful of those small companies. Well,
And is every
not small
asset
companies.
critical? No.
Not even in my system is every asset critical. Yeah.
And what do you do with people that are in critical infrastructure, SICI, but they say they don't have the technical capability or the money to defend?
I mean, I would say in today's time frame, you should probably look for a different business, because if you don't have the money to defend your system and your infrastructure, you're going to be out of business sooner or later.
Well, I was going to say, one of the messages that we take to our government partners, especially given some of our customers and the attention we get from multiple agencies simultaneously, is the importance of looking at the threat and the solutioning against the threat from a very holistic perspective, right? So those investments can be efficient, can be targeted, and can get the most bang for the buck, right? So you referenced a movie, right? I'm going to reference Dodgeball, right? We keep getting told that we got to dodge a ball from China, right? And if you've ever played dodgeball or watched the movie, sometimes the best way to dodge the ball is not to dodge, it's to dip, duck, dive, or dodge, right? And so sometimes the best way to reduce the risk might be cybersecurity controls, but it might be redundant infrastructure, right? It might be undergrounding of transmission lines. It might be having the water utility build a microgrid that helps keep them resilient, so that we've then got the cross-sector interdependencies addressed. That perspective has to be allowed in these conversations, so that we are doing this as efficiently and effectively given the time frame we have.
And we have a couple of questions, but let me hit one more movie. I always like to do it. River runs through it. You're fishing for trout, and you look for swales and little perturbations in what would otherwise be a normal pool of water in a river. In the world of quantum computing and everything else, you're not just looking for fish malware. You're looking for fish DNA. You're looking for, is there evidence of, was something there, or is something a little unusual? I get that the federal government probably has unique capabilities, and certain people in the private sector have unique capabilities. That's where this aspiration of sharing, of completely collaborating in this environment is so important. But I would also say, and this sounds a little harsh, but it is true, in the reimagination of national security, if you are involved in a critical infrastructure, a SICI asset, and if you can't participate as you should, then you should get out. We need to rethink how the private sector has this role and how it needs to play.
Just real quick. First of all, Tom, love your work and your leadership. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about ACI. When as a country, or when as a world, do we start talking cyber safety versus cybersecurity? When do asset owners start realizing that if they don't have mandatory protections in their systems, they will kill people or cause property damage? The history of engineering is built around standards of care, around mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, civil engineering, about the fact we were killing people and we needed to stop killing people. When do we start embracing cyber safety as a mandatory action versus the optional cybersecurity we continue to struggle with?
And you know, the word mandatory to me is an alarm bell a little bit. Highway safety is mandatory, but we don't have speed limits at 20 miles an hour. So there is always this idea of what is at risk versus what can I do. It's either accommodate or avoid. Here's the thing, I think. If you are in the critical infrastructure business, it is a mandatory. I worry about too many regulations saying this is what you must do. The idea of a regulatory environment for cyber is one that always must look ahead, set a standard of process and consequence achievement, rather than, no, you're deemed to be safe right now, but the way you're deemed to be safe right now is based on a history that may be 3 years old. You really have to figure out a way to put in place a compliance framework, whether it is law or regulation, that is forward-looking, that skates to where the puck will be.
Yeah, I also think a lot of critical infrastructure companies that where safety was a primary focus, security is already walking right beside that conversation.
And I'll give one more. I'll give one more example. The crown jewels of the electric system are not a nuclear plant, or when people throw the grid around, I don't think they know what they're talking about when they just say grid. Okay? If you can impact the power management system, if you can impact the telemetry of the flow of electrons, you've done something. Now, your idea of defending against that may be, oh, well, at Southern Company, we'll have a power management system over here in Birmingham. We'll have another one in an undisclosed location so that if Birmingham gets hit with a big bomb, we can still run the system. And then there's a system that we call flat tire that says if there's a real problem in this area, we can get to a gas station, we can leave the scene of the accident, and we can get there. We probably can't run a power market off of it. You'll have voltage swings and a variety of other things, but you'll still be okay. The last one is called MacGyver. And what that means is we can take a paper clip and make a submachine gun out of it. And ultimately, what we can do is unplug from the digital age. Let's run the electric system as we ran it in the 50s. Now, our communication Achilles heel is how can I talk to somebody in Mobile in order to throw a switch manually? Those are things we're going to have to. And I think we got answers for all this. I throw out issues like that, but I think we all, as a society, are building answers to keep America safe.
Right to the heart of what you talked about, of thinking anew in terms of how we share cross-sector intelligence in real time and getting to the left of an incident. With advanced persistent threats running low and slow, weeks and months, it's really hard for operators to know when that virus has grafted to normal operating procedures. And moreover, once you've got your SOC leaders trying to determine the difference between a real signal and a noise, by the time they have the confidence to act, it's too late. And I know in utilities, we have, some of them are together, we call it Unite, and there's others where they're like talking through signal. Hey, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Is this something real? Do we need to look at this? Is there anything that we have right now that allows utilities, both power and telecom and water, let's just start there, to those SOC operators to be able to communicate, protecting their data, federalized, but private, anonymized data with each other in real time so that they can tell the difference between what is real threat signal and what is noise earlier?
So we're very much trying to do that through the ETAC, right? Where we're doing building the capacity for the automatic data sharing, right? Right now it's specific to the energy sector, but the goal is to integrate our critical infrastructure sector partners with the tools that they have so that we are doing that cross collaboration. We've recognized importantly, right, the various capacities that different intelligence agencies have and the importance of integrating across the sectors.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are places where you can go, like the NSA Cyber Collaboration Center or something, and you can set up some feeds from your SIM or SOAR or whatever, and push it into those platforms. I don't know if there's one, you know, as a chief security officer, I don't think that there is one place where I go every time to get the answer. And I don't know if that's necessary, but I think that was kind of your question. And I would say there's not a single source of truth for me today.
But there will never be, I think, so long as you see the world evolving like poly threats. And that's why you have this need for owner operators that are focused on consequence management to work together with government, the intelligence community, sector risk management agencies, and those that will hold the bad guys accountable, Department of War, FBI, Secret Service, U.S. Cyber Command. We all have to work together to protect this nation. And that's what I think is different today and for time to come. Thank you very much.
is clearly essential, and I genuinely appreciate the effort Tom and obviously Michelle and others who make that happen are doing. So thank you for that. And we're at our last fireside chat, last but certainly not least. But before I introduce Nick Anderson, just want to let everyone know lunch is available immediately afterwards. Try to get a nice view. You're not going to get this view every day while you're eating. And I also would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to my team who did amazing work. And we put this together in a month. So just so many moving parts, but Kyle Klein, Victoria Dillon, Hudson Liverance, and everyone else who contributed to this day. I also want to thank our sponsors that make this view possible. So we would not be sitting here if it weren't for them. So thank you. And I have the privilege now to sit down with Nick Anderson. Nick, I think, is known to everyone in this room. He is the acting director of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. He is also the deputy director of CISA. Comes to this issue with tons of experience. I don't mean to start with, but a decorated Marine, hoorah. So thank you for your service there. He also served as a CIO in a state at Vermont. Served in CSER, served in advisory roles in the White House, so brings not only policy expertise, but a ton of technical expertise and a ton of scar tissue. He's been in the trenches seeing things as they unfold and genuinely continuing to learn from all of that. And I think we as a country are in a better place because of all of that. So thank you, Nick, for joining us today. Thank you for your leadership. And I thought I'd start, since Chris Butera was here with the federal panel earlier, what I thought I'd like to start with is your priorities. What are your priorities as director of CISA? We've seen bits and pieces, but I think we're starting to see it all coalesce and come together. So why don't we start there?
And Chris gave me a warning that with our shared brain that he and I have, that he may have stolen most of my talking points. But I mean, I think when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, CISA is most effective when our nation does not have to think about its critical infrastructure. And I think that's the balancing act that I find myself in, is both wanting to talk endlessly about critical infrastructure and to make people hyper aware of the threats associated to our critical infrastructure without being so hyperbolic that people become scared. You know, I don't think we ever want an American to have to walk into a room and hit a light switch and wonder, are the lights going to come on today? You know, that's not an environment that we want to be able to live in, but being able to have that important conversation about critical infrastructure resiliency. And the mission of CISA, though until very recently I was sitting there exclusively in my cyber hat role, is so much more than just our cyber mission. You know, we have got our Office of Bombing Prevention within our Infrastructure Security Division. We have our emergency communications role. We've got a UAS and counter UAS discussion. You know, while we continue to see things like synagogues being targeted over the course of the past week. We see a physical security mission that continues to grow in its importance and has been important for an awful long time on things like houses of worship protection. So when I look at CISA and our priorities, it is, very simply honoring the special trust and confidence that the American people have placed in us to keep them safe and to keep them secure, whatever the systems are they're relying on to live their lives.
And maybe as a backdrop, paint from your perspective sort of the threat environment that we're looking at right now, because these things don't happen in a vacuum. There's so much going on every minute of every day. I mean, I've been with you and you're getting pinged every 3 seconds.
Yeah, I can feel the vibrations going off my pocket right now
as we speak.
So that's really why I'm sweating up here. It's not just because I'm this close to this many Auburn logos. It's
another SEC school, which I did not bring up. So sorry.
So it's really when we look at the threat environment, it's exceedingly dynamic, and it continues to shift and it continues to evolve on a daily basis. And I think when we start to think about the strategic picture of what we typically look at as nation state adversary X is hoping to achieve this, Yes, that is a very real thing. But just as we see the technology ecosystem continuing to advance and we continue to see the technology advancements that our citizens are so excited about, that businesses are so excited about, every single one of those presents yet another opportunity for the environment to shift just a little bit more, provide just a little bit more complexity and a little bit more thought and a little bit more rigor that we have to put into, what is it that we're doing to secure our systems for, the protection of day-to-day lives. So go ahead.
Yeah, and from nation states all the way down to disgruntled employees and insider threats, right? I mean, you cover the whole canvas.
And it's everything in between. When we start to look at the physical security threats, we've got just a slew of high-profile events that are going to be happening in our nation over the course of the next 2 years. We've got everything from World Cup, which is not just about the stadiums and the locations where we're actually going to see matches played. That's 48 different base camps that are built up throughout our nation that are not going to actually see a match played, but they're going to house teams. They're going to be practice facilities. There's going to be all the infrastructure and the logistics associated with that. I mean, we're going to have billions of eyeballs worldwide, planted on that final match, just for that one particular match, in a way that is going to entirely dwarf everything that we typically do as an agency or as a department or as an interagency with things like Super Bowl preparation or Olympics preparation.
And Olympics on the heels, right?
And that's going to be right there with LA 28. We've got America 250 events, we've got FIFA and the World Cup, we've got LA 28, and we have an exceedingly dynamic cyber threat environments that we continue to see shape and evolve. And when I look at the nation state threat actors that are present today and are most heavily invested in changing and setting the terms of our engagement within this ecosystem, it is not simply those that are seeking to take advantage of technical risk within the space. It is about using that as an objective to achieve an economic means. It is about trying to supplant America's place in the overall world order. It is about using cyber as an effective tool of statecraft in a way that we are not necessarily engaged in that same sort of battle.
And I might note, I live in this world pretty closely, and I sometimes forget the vast mission space that CISA entails. And one of our former senior fellows is Reynold Hoover, who is a pro who's running the Olympics for LA from a security standpoint, and genuinely good guy. But the cyber component for planning is that used to be, I will never say an afterthought, but it was not as high on the list. Where does that rack and stack today?
I'd say it's exceedingly important, but it's not just whether it's for LA 28 or for FIFA or any of these other major events. It's not just about the individual sites. It's about being able to talk to states and locals and municipalities and the surrounding infrastructure. It's about making sure that the metropolitan infrastructure that we see, if I was using DC as an example, just because we're all right here, it would be about having conversations with WMATA, about the metro. It would be having conversations with DC Water. It would be having conversations with our power providers, whether it's PG&E or others. It's about that surrounding infrastructure, making sure it's going to be resilient, because it would be just as disruptive to be able to see the gates aren't working to get into the facility. It would be just as disruptive if the gates weren't working for people to get into the metro, for them to be able to move from point A to point B. And it's about all the businesses as well. We need to be able to make sure that all elements of our critical infrastructure ecosystem, from hotels for check-in to restaurants to the communications infrastructure, that is all going to be able to provide for an experience that is going to be positive for all these people that are coming here and visiting our country and visiting these different sites from around the country, but also is going to be one that isn't going to lead to public panic while they're engaged in sort of these mass events that are being run.
And Nick, we did have Sean Cairncross earlier and some of the interagency, and Chris touched on this, but anything from the 6 pillars that leap out at you most? I think CISA touches more than touches, is central to each of the 6. But anything you want to pull out and tease out, and anything that surprised you in the strategy?
No, I can't say there was anything that surprised me. But from shaping adversary behaviors to common sense regulations, we've got our federal network security goals that are in there, our critical infrastructure goals that are in there, as well as everything that we need to do to sort of close that talent gap that's within there, and the critical
And I do
emerging
want to pull the
technology
thread on
goals.
talent gap in a second. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, great. I'll try not to get ahead of you. I won't touch on that one. But I mean, I think the two that most closely align to those elements where we're trying to focus our mission space right now are obviously the federal network security mission and the critical infrastructure one. Those are just glaringly, central to CISA mission and the reason that it exists. But for us, getting to that sort of ruthless prioritization effort, and I'm glad that our Australian friends are here because we're doing so much right now to match up some of the work that we're doing with like CI Fortify and trying to align that with critical infrastructure efforts there. This isn't just about our domestic mission space. This is about preparing for a crisis where we're going to need to be resilient across the international ecosystem as well. And that starts first and foremost with that special relationship that we have with our Five Eyes partners, but being able to continue to build upon that and ruthlessly prioritize what's important to us. So for us, we're trying to look at what is that overlay on sort of the blue view of space of what's important for national security, for continuity of the economy, for public health and safety, and for defense critical infrastructure. That's a great blue view. Now we've tried to go layer back in subcompartmented information to be able to take an intel view of now I need my red view because the adversary gets a vote here. So where is it that we can actually see intel that demonstrates to us in a measurable way they have targeted us or they are pre-positioning on these specific asset types or these specific asset owners for now us to be able to look at it and say, oh, great, well, now I've got a good targeted engagement list where we don't just have very broad conversations about saying critical infrastructure owner operators should, and sort of putting the burden on them to saying, here's a joint work plan that we're going to develop with a discrete set of partners to be able to develop real measurable increases and improvements in resilience for a discrete set of assets. This is my critique if I go back to my energy days and trying to look at how do I action something like the Section 9 list.
Mm-hmm.
It is exceedingly unfair to point to a critical infrastructure owner operator and say, you're really important, just go secure all the things. We need to be able to say, no, you're really important for the following reason, for the following functional support. How do we get down to a subset of assets that we need to be able to have a resilient to what level conversation to be able to prevent the cascading effects that we can see in a polycrisis environment?
Well said. And I've been a broken record on a lot of issues, but one in particular that I feel like we're poised is to move from that information sharing discussion to operational collaboration with particular sectors and in particular with particular outcomes. Do you feel like we're moving closer to that, or am I wrong with that philosophy?
Yeah, just everything's so much worse than you think. It's just yeah, no, I think the operational collaboration work that we're doing with many of our sector partners is just fantastic. And I know it is sort of an overused line to say government doesn't actually own the infrastructure. We're entirely dependent upon these partnerships that we have with operators in the field. But it's absolutely true. And I think the level of maturity, as I think we've gotten past the what should we be doing, what should the roles of owner operators be? What should the roles of government be in that space? I feel like we've hit a sort of a tipping point in sort of the maturity model where, again, we're able to go from should we be having these conversations? Should we even be working together? What are the right relationship norms? Actually getting to like, how do we get action oriented there?
Awesome. And because I mean, maybe, again, disagree with the premise, but I'm reminded of Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens, trust is the coin of the realm. And the only way you genuinely, firstly, it takes a long time to build and it can evaporate pretty quickly. But the only way you get to trust is to be in the same foxhole together, right? And to see a problem with an outcome you're jointly moving toward. And that's why I'm such a broken record on operational collaboration, because it's the only way you learn. And I think make mistakes and learn from them. It's not like no one's perfect. And I feel like there's this bar that everyone feels like they have to be perfect. The truth is how do you get better? And I think that's an important takeaway. In terms of some of the partnership discussions, we heard a lot about the interagency. We heard a lot about interagency with industry. Anything in particular there that you're most excited about?
Well, I think we've continued to see sort of evolving and maturing relationships, in particular on the interagency side. I know that you had, the folks from FBI up here earlier, and Caesar, and a couple of other agencies. Those have just been fantastic relationships for us that really serve as force multipliers. I think it's important for us to be able to say objectively who is best placed in order to be able to help achieve a certain outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at our sector risk management agency construct, that's important for a lot of reasons. It's less important to abide by that strictly and say CISA is the sector risk management agency for telecommunications. Therefore, every engagement, CISA needs to go make sure that we're fighting to make sure that if it's an AT&T or whomever, that we're going to go be the lead for that engagement. Maybe if FBI has the best relationship there, or if NSA has the best relationship there, maybe they should be the lead for it. Maybe we should allow them to lead that engagement. Maybe we've got a fantastic relationship with an energy sector company that the Department of Energy doesn't have as great a relationship. Well, great, then maybe we should take the lead there. A lot of this is really about getting the interagency to agree on very broad brushstroke. What are the most important things we need to be able to achieve? Who are the most important partners that we need to engage with, and who's best positioned to be able to deliver on whatever that outcome is. We may have some owner operators within a certain critical infrastructure segment that maybe the person they're best positioned to receive resources from is us, or maybe it's energy, or maybe it's EPA, or maybe it's FBI or NSA, or so forth and so on. We just have to be comfortable, I think, with taking off sort of those blinders and saying, I don't necessarily need to be in charge all the time, no matter who I am. I just need to make sure that this owner operator has the best partner teed up to lead that engagement. Because what we don't want to see is, we just don't want to see the Guam problem all over again.
Yeah.
Everybody was talking about Guam, and everybody was racing to Guam the last couple of years like kids chasing a soccer ball. I don't know that we can point to every single engagement that happened out there and say that was absolutely to the benefit of those owner operators, and it absolutely helped to achieve a greater level of resilience in a way that was not in some ways confusing to the overall goal.
That's a very refreshing approach. You get the players on the field, and you get those that are in best position to be able to advance the particular outcomes that are being looked at. And I'd like to ask, just because we've had a number of discussions, a great discussion with Horacio, the CEO of Booz Allen, and others around AI. What are you thinking broadly, and then specifically, how are you enabling some of that interagency, if you are, on some of these issues?
I think my biggest concern with AI is really just the velocity problem.
Speed, and then speed again.
Yes. So it's really reducing that window that we're seeing, where perhaps people had a week to 2 weeks to be able to address, published CVEs and be able to, appropriately mitigate it with a patch, or to have some other sort of risk mitigation measure into place. I just don't think that's the case anymore. I mean, so we're looking at what are the new objectives that we should have for being able to get to a specific measure of what is the timeline associated with how we can prescribe action, whether it's an entry into the CVE or as an entry that we've moved into the KEV, into the known exploited vulnerabilities database. And that CVE work is so exceedingly important to us because we view that as a public good, because we know that has international implications, and we're just going to continue to develop, maturity and governance around that to make sure that it's just even more thoughtfully applied across the board. But when we sort of look at that, AI really begins to create a problem for us in that way, where it's going to expose a lot of the basics that have just been ignored for a really long time. I think that it presents an opportunity for us within the defensive space as well. And I think more broadly, we've really got an AI governance issue that we need to address. I don't see us necessarily asking a lot of questions so far about how am I going to govern this, and how is this AI tool going to be appropriately applied within my environment, and what are sort of the policy bounds that I'm putting around that, so that either a business leader or a mission owner within the government space is really engaged very thoughtfully in how is this going to be applied, how is it going to impact my mission in both a positive and potentially negative way. You need one jerk in the room to be able to say, here's all the ways that this could potentially go wrong.
It never happens, right? Not in DC.
Normally that's all we have in the room.
But it's a great question. I mean, we talk a lot about the human in the loop from an offensive perspective, but it has just as significant implications defensively. And that is, I think, a pressing issue, and to do so in a way that doesn't stifle innovation and technology. So how do we ramp up policy to tech speed? We're never going to catch up, but we can at least ask the fundamentals, right? Last question is really your call to action. So since you're now in the acting role, and you did great work in the CSD role before that, but now you've got more priorities. What's your call to action to this group? What's the one takeaway that you want everyone here to keep in mind, and more importantly, translate the noun into the verb and get it done? And maybe a Circia question if you want to touch on Circia. So two in 38 seconds. So
yeah, pass. So I guess my call to action collectively for the group would just be, and I know it will sound overwrought, but government just cannot do this alone. And I'm fully aware of that in my role at CISA. No matter what role it has been within the last 6 months, we absolutely just cannot do this alone. So when we get to joint work plan development, we start thinking about owner operator levels of engagement. It needs to be a very, very honest conversation about what is needed. For some owner operators, I am fully expecting it to be a dollars and cents conversation. I need it to be I need you to rework your DHS grant program so that I can go buy this thing in order to achieve this level of resilience. For some people, it might just be an authorities conversation. It might need I can fully do everything that I need to today. I just need more liability coverage. And we need to go jointly engage the Hill to have that conversation. We can't do that unless we really have a truly honest exchange about what are the gaps and how are we going to address them together. So I think that's the broader call to action. I wish that I could tell you more about Circia, but unfortunately, with the shutdown being where it is entirely derailed our plans to have the town halls that we were going to have to finalize, getting that feedback and making sure that we're getting exactly the right approach with Circia, so we can come back out with a thoughtful approach. So we're hopeful that as soon as the shutdown ends, that we'll be able to reschedule those and get them going again, and have all the various town halls scheduled to continue to engage with the community in a thoughtful way on Circia.
Nick, my words, not yours, but Pillar 2 common sense regulation, Circia is an essential potential opportunity to get it right and move the ball. And I very much welcome the how, not just the why, which I think we all realize, but bringing in industry, getting their input, and doing it right. Nick, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for technically on during a shutdown, spending so much time with us, not only here but all day, every day during all of this. And thank you for your friendship and for everything you're doing to make the country more safe, more secure. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Please grab lunch. Take advantage of the view, and I appreciate everyone for a long but incredibly informative day, and this is the first of many, so stay tuned. Thank you.